Right, good morning, gentlefolk. I'd like to give you all a very warm welcome on quite a murky morning. My name is Howard Greenman, and I chair the Strategic Planning Committee and will be presiding over this meeting being held today on Wednesday, the 10th of July, 24. Can I ask, please, at the outset that all devices be turned off or to silent for the duration of this meeting? We can get enough interruption as it is without that as well. And on that note, talking about IT, can you all hear me okay? Such are the vagaries of our system, sometimes that can be a little bit numb. Morning, Jonathan. If there's a fire alarm, please exit the building via the nearest exits. That'll be the exits that you came through at the access points this morning, and congregate on the grass in front of the building. I would like to ask you to note that this meeting is being live streamed. It will be broadcast live to the Wiltshire Council via YouTube. So on that note, please be conscious of that when you speak. Please use the microphones and speak clearly into the microphone so you can ensure that you're heard on the live stream. And I hesitate to say this, but to any of the members of the public, do not worry about the 2-hour free parking limit, as we have arranged with parking services not to check the public car park at County during the duration of the meeting. I'm hoping we're not going to be much longer than that, if at all, but I'm just going to give you that heads up at the outset. I will now formally open the meeting. We're going to start with apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Ernie Clark this morning, who's been substituted by Councillor George Jeans. Good to have you with us, George, this morning. We also have, well, I'm going to register apologies, but I think it's only fair too, from Sarah Gibson. She hasn't actually registered her apologies, but I suspect she's got quite enough on her plate this morning as it is. Oh, did she? All right, that's fine, Adrian. Well, I'm very happy to record her apologies anyway, and wish her well for whatever she's doing today. But it might just be a little bit more important, I guess you would think, than being here. So wish her well anyway. I don't think we do have any other apologies, and I think apart from that, we're in full attendance this morning. You will have seen, I hope, the minutes of the previous meeting. Are you all comfortable with the minutes of the previous meeting? No questions there? Any abstentions? All comfortable with that? Well, that's a fair comment, George, yes. Right, okay, I shall sign those off, therefore, in due course. Declarations of interest. Yes, well, we have one. George wants to register a declaration of interest. Of course, for the two items we have on the agenda today, we do have two divisional members that are today members of the committee also. So I would remind you, I've got no doubt that I don't need to remind you of your obligations and predetermination, etc. And I guess I suspect that's one of the reasons that you're raising this, George. Did you want to say anything to that?
Yes, I do. I'd like to state regarding application PO 2022-08186, over 10 years ago, I would like to state my cousin sold the land that this proposal refers to, so I believe I got no connection whatsoever to it now. I sit on Mere Town Council. However, I abstain on all planning matters except tree applications and only give factual information. I do not debate the planning agenda item. Therefore, I enter this committee with an open mind and intend to speak and vote on this application.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. You've minuted that detail. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Tara. Yes, I accept that. Thank you. There are no chairman's announcements today, so I don't have to bore you with any of those. I'm just going to run now through how I foresee the public participation, just so that you can see how it's going to pan out today. The planning officer in a few minutes will present their report and explain their recommendation. They may invite comments from other officers if appropriate. And once again, we are well served with officers this morning. I thank them all for their attendance also. Thank you. At that point, I'll then be asking members of the committee if they have any technical questions they wish to ask of the officers. We'll then proceed to public participation, which is typically up to 3 objectors and 3 supporters able to speak to each item for up to 3 minutes each. In fact, we don't have a full complement of those speakers today. So I will probably give a little bit of latitude, but if I do this, it means that I want you to wind down what you're saying and you're overstepping the mark. So you know what I'm saying, because I will step in otherwise and cut you short. Following the public slots for objectors and supporters, there are slots then for statutory consultees where appropriate. We will then hear from up to 3 affected parish councils for up to 4 minutes each. Again, I should possibly give a little bit of latitude there. I don't want the meeting to be running on too lengthily today. Having said that, with all statements, I will apply reasonable discretion. After the parish councils, I will then invite the local unitary member for their application to speak. In fact, for one of the applications today, there will be 2 divisional members that I should be invited to speak, or close to anyway. I will then open the item to debate, and at that point, I will be asking the committee member to speak to move a motion, which I will expect to be seconded. Officer advice may need to be taken in relation to any motion, and at the conclusion of that debate, I will then proceed to a vote. That process will be repeated, of course, for each of the 2 applications that we have today. Is that all clear for everybody? You all understand the process that we aim to follow today. Thank you very much indeed for that. Planning's appeals and updates, we have just the one. This is one that has come to committee before. In fact, we've seen this twice, in fact, in the past. This was at Semmington Road, just to tell us that that appeal has now been lodged, which I think some of us expected. There's not really a lot more to be said to that today. So on that note then, I'm going to pursue the first application we have before us, which is the Stables, Bapperton Hill, Mere, Warminster, Wiltshire, extension to existing gypsy and traveller sites with 10 additional pitches, each pitch to consist of 1 mobile home, 1 touring caravan and parking. And I'd like to thank you, Linda, for the work you've put in on this, and hand over to you. Many thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members of the public. This application before you is a full application for... Sorry, can you all hear me okay? Good. Good. This application before you this morning is a full application for the use of land at Bapperton Hill in south of Mere for the use of 10 gypsy pitches to consist of a mobile home and a touring caravan and parking spaces per unit, utilising the existing access to the site. You can see the application site shown in red on the screen before you. And it also includes the installation of a sewage treatment plant and surface water attenuation to drain the site. The site, as you can see the outline there of the layout, it is a quite compact site showing individual pitches surrounded by proposed and existing landscaping and more planting proposed within the site. They say the access is as existing to serve the existing mobile home on the site, which has consent, which was granted in 2016 by this committee for a single unit of mobile home and a touring caravan for a gypsy family. The site's about 1.9 hectares in extent, approximately rectangular in shape, as you can see. It's about 1.4 kilometres south of the town of Mere, which is a local settlement, a service centre within your core strategy. It's sited to the south of the Cranbourne Chase National Landscape, previously known as Cranbourne Chase AONB, and it is in an area of the Blackmore Vale Special Landscape Area. It's set in a surrounding context of farmland. It's a relatively low-lying site. Character of the area is mainly small fields with significant hedging and trees around the field boundaries. As I mentioned, the site has planning permission, an implemented planning permission on the area that's actually in white on the sort of bottom right-hand corner of the screen in front of you, and that is a pitch that was granted for, well, 1 mobile home, 1 day room and 1 touring caravan, and a septic tank to serve that site. I expect we will hear comments later that the activities on that site are rather spread out. They have, And if this development is approved that's before you this morning, or then those other uses on the site would cease, and the land in question will be developed as before you this morning. There are no permanent buildings proposed as part of this application. I know members who've been sitting here before considering Gypsy and Traveller sites very often have a day room associated with pitches. I had asked the agent about that, and he's confirmed that there are no proposals for day rooms on this site, so any buildings would require planning permission. And at the moment, we are talking of an application just for mobile homes. You will see there's no details of those mobile homes because they would have to meet the requirements of the Caravan Sites Act in terms of their size. And if they meet those criteria, we have no issue with that. They would probably also require a site licence from your environmental health officers, which also make sure that they meet the criteria within the Caravan Sites Act. You'll see set out on your agenda the policies that apply to the site, and the most important ones for consideration by today are effectively CP2, which is the development strategy of the core strategy itself, and then CP47, meeting the needs of gypsies, travellers, and CP51, landscaping, and CP61 and 62, which are, or 60 and 61, which talk about sustainable transport. There is also the MPPF, which members will be very familiar with. You're also probably familiar with, there is a specific planning policy for traveller sites, which is an accompaniment to the NPPF, which details specifically policies for gypsy and traveller sites across the country. That was updated at the end of last year to update the definition of gypsies and travellers for the purposes of planning legislation, because there was a court case which found that definition previously was discriminatory, and it has been updated in line with the court's decisions on what a definition of a gypsy and traveller is for the purposes of planning. And that is set out elsewhere on the agenda, and I will go through that when I get there. You will see from your agenda that there was a significant local opposition to this application and significant objection from Mere Town Council, who've set out very detailed objections, which I've set out in full for you on your agenda, so you can see the weight of feeling. Gillingham Town Council, which are the Town Council in Dorset, immediately adjacent to, because this site's quite close to the county boundary, so they were consulted as an adjoining Town Council. They made no comments on the application. I've checked their minutes the other day just to see if anything had come through, and they haven't. Zeals, who are adjoining Parish Council, do object. If you look through the consultation responses from your own internal consultees, you will see that there are no objections received from your ecologist, subject to a condition which is set out on the report. Your drainage officers are happy with subject to conditions. Your highway officers are happy subject to conditions. The application has taken quite a while to come to committee because there's been a lot of negotiation in respect of making sure that the drainage scheme for the site is suitable and will work, and making sure that the access to the site is safe. We had no comments received from your landscape officers, and your spatial planning team raised no objection to the scheme when it was submitted. And you all hopefully will have seen an email from the spatial planning team of yesterday updating information in respect of the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, which was published last Thursday by the council, which updates the need figures as of April the 1st this year, and that updates some of the information I've set out in my agenda. So if you could be cognizant of the information set out in that email from the planning officer who is dealing with the Gypsy and Traveller development plan, that will be very useful. Where basically the need has gone up effectively from 79 pitches, which I've set out in my report, to 81 pitch requirement in the next 5 years. For Gypsy and Traveller purposes, we're still working on a 5-year housing supply need. That we know from normal housing, it's a 4-year rule because of the change to the MPPF in December, but that does not apply to your Gypsy and Traveller need at the moment, and there is a 5-year need, and we're just about, yeah, we're not quite there. So there is a need, and it also has been confirmed in that email that windfall pitches now count towards our total of need, where in previous decisions the council had not counted those towards its allocation because of decisions made by inspectors fairly recently across the county. That situation has changed, and as the officers set out, any pitches granted planning permission will count towards supply. So these 10 units would count towards the need of 81 across the county. And also in that email, and for the general public in listening as well, the council is about to start proceedings to carry out a consultation on the Gypsy and Traveller development plan document itself, with an item going to Cabinet next week to hopefully seek authorisation for a consultation to start in the autumn, summer and autumn, with the intention to submit that document next year for consideration by the Secretary of State. So we have moved forward on the development plan document, which is helpful. So we go back to principles of development set out in my report. Core policy to the delivery strategy, which defines limits of effectively states where development should take place within the county, has an exception for development outside of defined settlements, and that is the specialist accommodation provision, core policies 46 and 47. And the meeting of the needs for gypsies and travellers is one of the exceptions, and that is accommodated by a criteria-based policy which is set out in CP 47. So the next part of my agenda, which talks about need, etc., has been overtaken by the email that hopefully you all saw yesterday in terms of updating figures. So please ignore the table that's set out in the report, because that has been overtaken by events. So the main consideration this morning before you is, does this application for 10 pitches comprising of 10 mobile homes and 10 touring caravans and 2 parking spaces per unit and the associated infrastructure meet your criteria set out in policy CP 47? The criteria set out on the agenda for you. It says proposals for new Gypsy and Traveller pitches or travelling show people will only be granted where there is no conflict with other planning policies and where no barrier to development exists. New development should be situated in sustainable locations, with preference generally given to previously developed land or vacant or derelict sites in need of renewal. Where proposals satisfy the following criteria, they should be considered favourably. There are then 9 criteria, and I will go through those in respect of this site in turn. But we also have to sort of start by considering, are the applicants gypsies and travellers for the purposes of the legislation? And that has been, as I said earlier, that has been updated as of December last year, to persons of nomadic habit of life, whatever their race or origin, including such persons who, on grounds only of their own or family or dependents' educational or health needs or old age, have ceased to travel temporarily or permanently, but excluding members of such an organised group of travelling show people or circus people travelling together as such. So the change to the definition was the adding of the words "or permanently." So basically, gypsies who have travelled in the past but are now settled still count as a provision of a gypsy site for the purposes of the planning legislation. So that is a change from probably the last applications you might have considered as this council. And the applicants have informed us that their proposed occupiers do meet the criteria. And if, as you see, on one of the conditions proposed is that occupiers of this unit or these units could only be occupied by persons who meet that criteria. We can't insist we know who's going to move on. We can't do that for normal housing, and we can't do it for gypsy housing, gypsy sites either. But we do need to ensure that the persons who are residing on the site do meet the criteria as set out in the legislation. So if we go through the criteria in policy 47 in turn, the first criteria is that there are no significant barriers to development. And we normally look at that as physical barriers. The site is not within an area of flood risk of fluvial or groundwater flooding, according to the Council's strategic flood risk assessment, though part of it is liable to surface water flooding. And I know local residents have provided photographs in the past of parts of this site underwater. But a lot of work has been done between this council's drainage engineers and the applicant's drainage engineers to agree a scheme that shows that the site can be suitably drained and that there would be, and that foul water can be disposed of from the site, so that there will be no issues with foul water drainage from the site into the surrounding watercourses. And you can see in detail, I've set out how our engineers have assessed the site and what the applicant will need to do to comply with that policy. And it should also be noted that the Environment Agency would also have to license the package treatment plant to ensure that there is no off-site pollution potential. The second criteria is that the site can be served by a safe and convenient vehicular and pedestrian access. I'm aware that when the application was originally submitted, our highway engineers raised objection to the site and recommended refusal. The applicant then appointed a highway consultant, which is a standard practice when dealing with applications, that applicants are afforded the opportunity to overcome any objections raised by statutory constitutees. It's part of the negotiation process on any planning application. And the highway engineers have been on site and have assessed the application site and the application proposals in light of the evidence provided by the applicant's engineers, and have now recommended the application for approval. This was a similar outcome to the 2016 decision, which this committee adjourned a couple of times the application to make sure that the highway situation could be dealt with in a satisfactory manner, which included the stopping up of an existing access on site. It acknowledged that the applicant didn't close that access up straight away, but has done now in discussions in respect to this application. So the existing access onto the site, which if we go to the slides, please. Keep going, keep going, keep going. That's the new access, effectively. That's my old car parked in it. And that's the view looking towards Mere. So we have a setback from the verge. The visibility displays can be achieved within that site. So yes, we're aware that local residents have raised concerns about the highway access, but your highway engineers have been to the site, have assessed it, haven't done it as a paper exercise from Trowbridge, they've actually been there, and consider that with the conditions proposed that are set out in this agenda, the application is satisfactory and safe. It's accepted that there are no real pedestrian accesses in the location, but guidance in the national guidance in respect of gypsy and traveller sites acknowledges that gypsy sites are very often in rural or semi-rural locations where there may not be adequate footpaths or pedestrian access. So that is not an unusual situation where this application site is. Criteria 3, that site can be adequately serviced, was mentioned to you before. There is an application, the application includes the provision of a package treatment plant, which will need to be licensed by the Environment Agency. There's nothing within the applications or constitutive responses that would lead the LPA to conclude the site cannot be adequately serviced. I understand electricity has recently been provided on site. That is a matter really for the applicant to ensure that there is suitable servicing, and we have nothing to believe that they can't be serviced. The next criteria is about adequate parking and manoeuvring within the site. Again, we have no objection from your highway colleagues in respect of manoeuvrability within the site or the provision of parking. And I set out there the detailed response from your highway officer in respect of the access to the site. That probably should have been in criteria 2. Sorry, it's in the wrong one, but it's set out in detail how your highway officer has assessed the site and how they've come to their conclusion. The 5th criteria is that the site is located in or near an existing settlement with a range of facilities. Now, as set out before, the site is approximately 1.4 kilometres south of the town of Mere, which is listed as a local service centre in the core strategy, which does have a range of facilities that are set out before you. There are also a couple of bus stops not far from the site which serve the bus service going between Mere and Gillingham, which is marked as a fairly strategic bus route in the core strategy. So the fairly regular bus service between the settlements. And Gillingham is, as I say, members will be aware, a larger settlement that is relatively close to this application site as well. And as I say, policy C of the National Guidance Planning Policy for Traveller Sites acknowledges that gypsy sites can be located in rural or semi-rural setting, and paragraph 25 qualifies that advice. We have had appeal decisions elsewhere in the county where consideration has been given to distances, and a mile, 2 miles has not been considered inappropriate in more than one occasion. The next criteria is the proposal will not have an unacceptable impact on the character and appearance of the landscape and the amenity of neighbouring properties. The site doesn't have any immediate neighbours. The nearest property is about 130 metres away, which is Mapperson Hill Farm Complex, which is set at a higher level than the application site, closer to Gillingham. And the site is fairly flat. It's set in a rather level, flat part of the local landscape. It has some hedge boundaries around it and field boundaries around it and trees. The ones along the road frontage could do with a little bit more reinforcing. I think Tara, could we have a look at some of the photographs? I've got some photographs of the site. No, go back there. Yeah, back a bit, please. Yeah, these are photographs showing the point of access, and you can see that the field boundary or any boundary immediately adjacent to the existing application site, that existing site, is that little green building, is within the existing approved gypsy plot, can do with some reinforcement, but the application does show additional hedging and planting to screen the site. This plan here shows the site in relation to all the green at the top is the AONB boundary, or National Landscape Boundary, we should call it now. And all the purple lines are public rights of way within vicinity of the application site, which is highlighted in yellow. You will see from the comments that we've received from members of the public and others that an appeal decision earlier this century in respect of about 130 houses immediately adjacent to the settlement of Mere was dismissed by an inspector partially on the impact of the site when viewed from Castle Hill. Sorry, to this bit closer. an appeal was dismissed a few years ago of about 130 houses which were relatively close to the settlement of Mere, partially on landscape grounds and the impact of the development on the castle complex, which is immediately north of the settlement of Mere. Yes, that was a significant residential scheme relatively close to the settlement and relatively close to the features of importance. This site is about 1.3 kilometres south of that application site. It is a site for 10 caravans, which by their very nature are relatively low-lying. Yes, the site will be glimpsed in the landscape, I think you can say, but I don't think that it has such a significant impact on the landscape setting that it would warrant refusal. Looking at that appeal decision, the inspector made comments relating to the views of a substantial residential development with its associated features, not a small caravan site at a distance, of much greater distance to the feature of importance than the appeal decision. So the site can be glimpsed when you are driving past it, and it will continue to be so. And there are probably some views from possibly Monarch Way. Next, keep going. Yes, that's the closed access. If you keep going, Tara, please. This is heading towards Mere, coming down the hill past the farm, and the arrow marks roughly where the application site is. So you can see that when those hedges are green, which they are for quite a proportion of the year, the site is not readily visible. It's only visible really when you get quite close to it, when you go past it. And the same is from the other direction because of, yeah, that's getting close to the site, again, heading towards Mere. Can you have the next one, please? That's the application site as it is at the moment, with the hedges quite low. What you can see coming from Mere heading towards Gillingham is on the ridge is actually Mapperton Hill Farm itself rather than the application site. The application site is sat below that and will be partially screened in the wider landscape from that farm complex. I think there's one more, Doris. Yes, you can actually, sorry. Yeah. I can't get this any closer. No, it's all right. Is that better? Good, thank you. So yes, the site will be visible, but not, I would argue, not in the wider landscape. It'll be mainly glimpsed when you're approaching it from the highway. There probably will be some glimpses from Monarch Way, which is on a slightly higher ridge. But again, there are other farm complexes in the area which have a series of buildings of a similar sort of scale and nature to this site. And I don't think this site is going to be so significant that it's going to stand out and would be inappropriate in this location. The next criteria in the policy is that adequate levels of privacy can be provided for occupiers. Well, as I mentioned before, this site is self-contained. It has no near neighbours. There is proposed landscaping around the site to help screen it. What we wouldn't want to see, though, and there's a condition to that effect in the recommendation, is that significant fences were constructed around the site, because that, I would argue, that would bring attention to the site. Soft hedging won't quite so much, but a stockade type fencing would, and it's not proposed as part of the application, and there's a condition to say that if any fencing is proposed, it would require planning permission to overcome that issue. The next criteria is that the site will be appropriate to the scale and characteristic surroundings. Well, as I've just described, I think it is a relatively small scale development. It's set in an area of it's a rural area with scattered farm complexes and associated buildings and outbuildings. I don't think it'll have an appearance any significantly different to those farm complexes in its immediate surroundings. There is a condition proposed about lighting, because I know that was a concern of residents as well, that it will have inappropriate lighting. I don't see why that should happen. That is something that we would like to control as well, because it shouldn't be lit up like a beacon, and there's no requirement for that on a site of this scale. There's also been concern expressed about the scale and number of gypsy sites within the vicinity of this application site and in the proximity of Mere. Members may recall last year granting consent for 4 pitches on a site which is probably about 300 or 400 metres from this site, and there's 1 pitch on here at the moment. So if this scheme were consented, there would then be 15 pitches south of Mere that had planning permission. But you will see from an appeal decision set out in the village of Minety, which members will be aware of, there have been an inspector there considered a much greater concentration of gypsy pitches on a much smaller village was still considered acceptable. Mere has a population of about 3,000 at the last census in the parish. So this will be 15 families over and above a population of 3,000. So I don't think it could be argued that that should be a significant figure that would be detrimental to the character of the area. And the final criteria is that the site will not compromise any nationally or internationally recognised designations, nor have effect on water, river quality, biodiversity or archaeology. The site lies outside of the River Avon catchment, which members will be aware has issues with nutrient neutrality. It is not affected by that. It drains the River Stour, which goes through Dorset. And at the moment, the Stour is not affected. It has no designations on it, statutory designations in terms of its landscape quality or any wildlife or biodiversity. And your archaeologists are happy that with a watching brief, effectively, works carried out before the development commences, that the archaeological issues could be dealt with. So in terms of criteria 9, it's argued that this site would not compromise any nationally or locally designated, or nationally or internationally designated sites. The other policy that is applicable is CP51 landscape, and I think I've described that, discussed that here, that it's argued that because of the low nature of the site and caravans, to meet the caravan site definition, can't be any more than 10 feet, 3 metres high, and with landscaping around it, it is a low site. It'll be a low-level site in a low-level landscape. With extensive views, and I don't think that it is going to have a significant impact that would warrant refusal on grounds of CP51. We then turn to the issue of 5-year land supply. That information in this part of the report has been updated by the information provided by the officer yesterday, that the need for gypsy and traveller sites to meet the 5-year target for this county has actually gone up from the last appeal decision of 79, is now standing at 81. So this site for 10 units would make a significant contribution towards meeting that 5-year target. So the recommendation to you this morning is that this application be approved subject to a significant raft of conditions which are set out on your agenda, which actually would ensure that the site is carried out in a satisfactory manner and that it minimises its impact on the wider landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for that. There's a lot of detail there to digest. I trust we took that all in. I'm going to ask for questions. I've already got a number of hands that came up. Pip, I think yours is the first. Yes, please.
Just some clarity on the numbers that you are quoting on page 37 and 38. Go up to 2021. Is there any further, do we have any further? It does say there, transit provision up to 21 is 10 and proposed requirement 22, but up to 2021, have we not done a further of how many we need up to date?
Yes, the Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment, which was published last Thursday. Have you seen the email from Henning Tos that was attached to your agendas?
Yeah, it's in Agenda Supplement 1. The email regarding it, anyway.
If I can read that email out.
Yes,
Chris, if-
sorry, my apologies.
That's okay. Yes, that there is an updated figure that basically now says from this current GTA's base date of the 1st of April this year, and it basically requires the first 5 years there's a need for 135 pitches
Right.
identified for the county. But the plan this is work that's going into the proposed Gypsy and Traveller development plan document, which Cabinet will be
We're looking at this afternoon.
and Cabinet will be discussing next week. Says that the officer here says the plan takes a more nuanced approach to the need arising in the first 5 years and excludes teenage need from the full pitch requirement, resulting in an 81 pitch requirement for 22.
Right. That was what I wanted,
Yeah.
thank you.
So that's updated from the 79 in my report. So the need has actually gone up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, yes, this
My apologies not having that amendment with me.
Thank you, Chair. That's all very well. However, what legal weight can we give what is only a printed document, hasn't been considered by Cabinet at this stage, has not been adopted by this council at this stage. So presumably it is emerging policy with no status at this stage. What weight can we give that at this meeting? And I have other questions.
You're correct, Councillor, that your emerging DPD has no weight at the moment because it hasn't even been through Cabinet to be accepted for consultation. But the figure of need for the 81 units is set, because that is established in your updated Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment, which is carried out on a rolling programme. That's what informs the policies that hopefully will emerge out of your DPD. So the number, which has been assessed by an independent consultant on a nationally accepted programme of how you carry out a DPD, is your target. That's like your assessed need for housing purposes. What your DPD will be looking at is how you meet that need. So
But
you
it
have a need.
hasn't
So
been
you have a need
accepted.
of 81 units. The previous appeal decisions showed that you had appeals from about March this year. We're showing it was 79. It has now gone up to 81. So that's your housing target, and you say your DPD will assess how you meet that target.
So I'm not denying that we've got the 79 because we have, and we have an allocation for the south, which is greater than I think this application. But the weight of but as you say, the weight of the emerging policy has no weight until it's been put out for consultation, rather like a neighbourhood plan.
Yes, that's correct. You have no policies yet, but this is the number is to be used to assess need against your criteria-based policy, CP47, because it updates the table effectively in CP47. The previous councillor commented that figure is out of date. So you now have a date of 1st of April 2024, which updates that need in the table for 47 as 81 units.
Okay, got that. I've got two other questions. One is on sustainability. I can see in the report and accept that Gypsy and Traveller applications are exempt CP2 in sustainability, for their sustainability. However, CP47 isn't, I can't see is quite as clear. Are Gypsy and Traveller applications exempt the sustainability aspects of CP47, and coming off that, you mentioned that there were a couple of bus stops a mile away. Well, if that was an application for a settled house, that would not be considered sustainable, because it would be considered to be too far away. And the same with facilities like shops. Again, if this was an application for a settled house, CP47, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the sustainability aspects for that would mean that the facilities, shops will be considered too far away. I'd just like some guidance on that, because I think there's some ambiguity there. I understand absolutely CP2, Gypsy and Traveller sites exempt, but sustainability in CP47, please.
CP47 is your policy on Gypsy and Travellers, which it tries to get sites as close to settlements as possible, but we are guided also by what is set out in national guidance about Gypsy and Traveller sites, and I'm just trying to find it. Here it is. Policy C of Planning Policy for Traveller Sites acknowledges that Gypsy sites can be located within rural or semi-rural settings. Excuse me. And paragraph 25 qualifies this advice by stating that new traveller, they should be away from, new travellers sites should be very restricted to hold in the open countryside. This is away from existing settlements. The phrase away from has been interpreted on appeal to mean isolated, where sites within a reasonable distance of existing settlements, in some cases up to a mile, have been accepted as not being away from for the settlement purposes. So appeals have accepted, inspectors have accepted that sites for Gypsy and Travellers that, yes, you're correct, for normal, straightforward housing, we probably wouldn't accept. But by the nature of the applications that we are dealing with, they are quite often slightly divorced from settlements. This one, the bus stops are not a mile away. They're closer than that. I can't remember exactly how close, but they are within walking distance, but the road's a bit fast, so that's an issue. But they are on that stretch of road. They serve, I think, the Mapperton Hill Farm complex. Sustainability, I think you put to one side a little bit when you're dealing with a Gypsy and Traveller site, because national guidance
is that written down that we can
well, that's
we
in
can put
basically
sustainability as such to one side, because that would drive a coach and horses through all our planning policies.
No, it is in the national guidance that says that they can be located in rural or semi-rural settings. So it's implying that they are not necessarily adjacent to settlement. And your policy CP47 is an exception to CP2, which says they can be outside of settlement boundaries. So it allows for Gypsy and Traveller sites outside of settlement boundaries. So by their nature, if they're outside of a settlement boundary, in our policy terms, they're not sustainable. But our policies allow for sites outside of a settlement boundary because of the nature of the application you have before you.
So are we going to get it minuted that we are happy to grant Gypsy and Traveller site permissions that are not in sustainable, forget rural, because you can have a rural location outside a bus stop with a shop, farm shop 200 yards down the road. That's sustainable, presumably. That's a rural location. I'm trying to drive the difference between rural and sustainable. The word sustainable, to my mind, is a policy, is a key policy word, and that's the answer I'm trying to tease out of you. And I have got one more question after that.
Okay, we go back to sustainability. Your CP policy CP2, which defines where settlement can take place within the county, says that any development outside of the defined settlement boundary is not sustainable. But then it has an exception that says other than sites such as gypsies and travellers, or there's other criteria that are set out. So your policies do accept that development outside of the settlement boundary, if it is meeting the special needs housing for gypsies and travellers or for rural employment, etc., they can be in a location that your policies would say were not technically sustainable because they're outside of the settlement boundary. Because the way that your policy CP2 works is if it's in the settlement boundary, it's sustainable. If it's outside the settlement boundary, it's not. It's quite clear. It's in the open countryside. But you have an exception to that policy which allows for development in places where you wouldn't grant straightforward normal housing because of the nature of the application and because of the nature of the use.
Okay, I'll take issue on some of that, but I understand the answer you're giving for the purpose of this application. Coming on to a final point, which is the numbers for gypsy and traveller sites that are accepted for the purposes of assessing need. We're clearly shown a shortfall, and you mentioned a shortfall of pitches. Well, I would ask whether, and this is quite a loaded question, whether those pitches are pitches which have been given planning permission, or whether those pitches are pitches that are occupied and are therefore per se pitches in the county. Because, for instance, I represent the area of Semmington, and I happen to know, as does this council, that there are in excess of 40 additional caravans on the two sites in Semmington, none of which have got permission. But if they were to be counted for against the assessment of need, our need would be driven right down. Now, were that to be houses, then I suspect they would be counted. Now, what is the definition? And I suspect to know the answer, and maybe it's a slightly naughty question, but what is the answer as to where we assess the need? Is it only those that have been applied for, or is it that much greater figure that has been occupied?
I think you'll find it's probably those that are occupied. The Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment is carried out by a firm of consultants who are based in Swansea University, from memory. They visit sites where there are known gypsies. So it's not just authorised ones, it's ones where they know there are gypsies, and carry out surveys and questionnaires with the gypsy population. So they're trying to get a picture of the totality of the population within the county. So it's not just those sites that are authorised. I haven't gone through the new assessment in great detail. It's a long document. I only saw it yesterday afternoon for the first time. But it does mention in there that there are sites that are not authorised that are visited as well.
That's really helpful, and I will write to the head of development after this meeting to take this point up.
Thank you for that, Linda. I'm going to come to you in just a minute, Adrian. I just wanted to help inform our thoughts, just to remind us, perhaps, because a couple of issues have been raised here, which may be well worth us bearing in mind. Core Strategy Policy CP47, this is on page 40, sets out sustainability considerations for gypsy and traveller sites, amongst other policy considerations. CP47 Criterion 5 deals with sustainability, and in quotation marks, proposals would be considered favourably if located in or near to existing settlements within reasonable distance of a range of local services and community facilities. in particular schools and essential health services. I absolutely take Jonathan's point and his concern there. But it goes on to say, this site is located 1.3 miles driving distance south of the town of Mere, which is listed as a local service centre in the core strategy, where there are a range of facilities, including a school, doctor's surgery, shops and businesses. There are bus stops within walking distance of this site, with services into Mere and Gillingham. The report goes on to say, I've noted that this application reference 20/07643 residential caravan site for 4 gypsy families, which recently was recommended for permission and received permission, is a greater distance from Mere Centre than this one, with a driving distance of 1.5 miles. So I just wanted us to confirm that. We've had one further away from Mere than this one is, which was approved, which was granted permission. And of course, that did take into account CP47, whether we like the interpretation of CP47 or not, is probably not our gift. That was what was agreed at the time. And of course, that has since been approved on appeal as well. The other issue that I just wanted to just flesh out was this one, again, that Jonathan has raised. This is agenda item 7. The final paragraph on page 45 says, I should advise that the plan is still at an early stage in the process and therefore carries very limited weight in decision making. That's basically what Jonathan said. He said no weight. It says very little weight. The plan anticipates that additional windfall permissions will be required to improve supply, which is hovering around the 5 years. And just to go back to Linda's point, the figure 81, although the policy hasn't yet been agreed, we haven't been through the consultation process. The figure of 81 that we have is sacrosanct. We are aware of that figure. That's not that's a given. That isn't immovable as it stands at the moment. Adrian, Councillor Foster, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm grateful to all three of you because Councillor Cedars brought up one of the questions I had in mind, which was the sustainability, and you've both expanded on that to some extent. And I accept, I'm disappointed that it isn't a sustainable access like a public footpath or a footpath on the side of the road, but the fact that there's a bus stop reasonably near is helpful, but of course, nobody would want a child walking along this road to get to a bus stop to get to school. And so therefore I am concerned about the implications for the future for the council here, because with 10 sites and children, then there would be, if they were to apply for assistance for the children to get to school because there isn't a sustainable route there, then we would have to finance the cost of those children to be transported to school, because we don't meet the criteria. It doesn't meet the criteria, and that's why CP47 has that particular element in it for developments for houses and everything. So I am aware of the implications of overriding the need of a specific need that's specified, and that every time you override something that's in core policy, it will have another implication, and in this case, it will have a cost implication to the council. And that's only one aspect I'm aware of. When it comes to doctors and other things, there might be other policies as well. But I think we've addressed that one enough that it's not a route that we can fight on, but as long as we're aware of the implications. My other concern was, it was mentioned right at the beginning that there is no day rooms here. Now, when we've looked at these sites in the past, it's been pointed out to us that it's recommended there is a day room with every single site, and mostly with X number of caravans and the size of the day room. What are the implications of it not having a day room? And what is the reason for saying it's approved in this case without a day room when we have in the past insisted there were day rooms? I don't understand the regulations and the ruling behind that, and would appreciate guidance.
Yes, a gypsy and traveller pitch normally consists of a mobile home, a day room and a touring caravan. And that's the guidance in the national policy of what a pitch normally consists of. I specifically asked that question of the applicant's agent because, like you, we normally see day rooms associated with the application. But the answer that came back is that they considered in this instance they don't want day rooms. And I'm sure the agent who is here can answer that point for you in more detail. I asked the question, that's the information that came back to me. Therefore, any building that was proposed would require planning permission if they wanted them at a future date.
This has quite an important point because of the social interaction that occurs by having a day room. We insist on community facilities when we do developments for housing, and I think that travellers should have an equal right to equal facilities. And in this case, we're proposing and recommending to go ahead without sufficient facilities being provided, and that does concern me.
I wouldn't necessarily conclude that we're proposing a scheme with inappropriate facilities if it's the applicant's choice and the applicant is a member of the Gypsy community. And I'm anticipating that it is for his extended family's use, from what I understand. Therefore, they know what they want. So we're approving, I'm recommending you to approve the application as submitted by the applicant. We don't on any other application go back and said, well, you haven't got enough facilities, you should provide more. That's not how we normally carry out the planning matter.
Can I therefore bring you back to the point you made earlier, that when we approve an application of this nature, we don't insist on who lives there and we don't vet them. We have no idea whether this will in the future be these particular families, and therefore we're going to develop a site which doesn't have suitable facilities for others who might be living there at a later date.
Yes, that might be the case, but you can't prejudge an application on what might happen in the future. You have to consider the application that's before you today. And this is the applicant's choice of how they've submitted the application to you. Specific question has been asked and has come back in the form it has, and I'm sure the agent will address that matter in his address to you when he gets the opportunity later.
I hesitate to wade into this, but of course there are different categories within the travelling community. And these choose not to have a day room to be able to provide their facilities. Another category might choose to have a day room, in which case that would be a separate application, that would be a matter for another consideration some other day. But in this case, they choose not to have the day room. Those that we've looked at in the past have not been for Romanis, so there's a fundamental difference there. Councillor Jeans, George, please. Thank you.
I got 6 technical questions. I'll ask them one at a time through you, Chair, if that's okay. Expanding on the day room, which is an extra one to what I was going to ask, is that I have read the conditions, and this reference is made several times that it's tied to the family. Well, I haven't seen a condition, is it, that it's tied to the family? Because the red line is separate to the blue line of the applicant's property. And is there a condition that ties, because the application site, the red site, is outside of the blue line? So therefore, I can't see anywhere where that it's tied. So we're being told that it's for the applicant's extended family, but and the point is made that should that change, but should there not be a condition that that ties this more effectively? I'll ask that first through you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jeans. No, there's no condition requiring the applicant, the occupancy of this site to be tied to the applicant or his family, because there's no need. We're addressing, there's a condition that says the applicant or the occupiers of the units must comply with the statutory definition of gypsies and travellers for the purposes of the planning legislation. And that is as much as we can do. It is not, in some circumstances, where there are personal circumstances put forward by the applicant, personal conditions are suggested. But the government advice is you don't grant personal consents unless you really, really have to. And in this instance, we understand that there is an unmet need for pitches across the county. This site would count towards the windfall site of 10 pitches. If they meet the criteria, that is all that we can do. We don't need a personal consent. The applicant hasn't asked for a personal consent, and the one isn't necessary in this instance.
Right, thanks, Howard. Through you, Howard, I'll make a comment and move on to another question, but I hope the committee will look further when they debate this regarding what's just been said. The next question is regarding refuse collection, that can you say what's envisaged? Because obviously there's refuge in the recycling. I mean, is it going to all be put on the side of the road? Because it's quite substantial. There's 11 units there, and there's no longer the amount of area that there was previously. Is the refuge going to go into the site to collect? Can you please expand on that?
I wouldn't anticipate that one of our refuse vehicles would enter the site, as it's probably, if it's a hog-in surface within the site, which is what the application sets out, it wouldn't be sufficient to take the weight of one of our large refuse vehicles. So I would anticipate that that there will be a collection point close to the access.
So will that be today, if this was approved, will that be shown the where it's to be, or via condition, or however you're going to do it?
We could add a condition to the recommendation that the bin store location is shown on the application site.
Otherwise, I can foresee that they may not all remain in one area. The next question is regarding the core policy 47, but I think it's little 4. But I know that you're saying it's sustainable because it's close to Mere. I'm not arguing that, but I mean, has any consultation ever been carried out to see if the doctors of the school can take, because there's quite a lot this is. It's not just 1, it's 10.
Those technically are not material considerations on the planning committee. They are matters to be dealt with by the providers of those services. The point that the previous councillor made about costs to the local planning authority, the local authority, in terms of potentially school transport, etc., are not material planning considerations when considering this application. Those services exist. It would be no different if we were granting 10 dwellings within the settlement of Mere. Those services for the doctors, etc., would have to pick up those patients. The patient services or the NHS are aware normally of the amount of development that is heading for them in an area, and they have obligations to make sure they've got enough facilities. It's not a material consideration. It's no different than a consideration for straightforward normal housing.
Next question is regarding parking. Is 2 spaces per pitch. It's quite, I believe, the average would be above that now, probably 2.2 cars or something per there. So what space is provided for visitors, utility vehicles, etc.? Because this is quite dense regarding parking, as I can see.
Your highway officers have looked at the scheme and have raised no objection and have required no additional parking or accessibility or manoeuvring within the site. Therefore, it's difficult to go back to the applicant and say we want more when your highway officers have not raised that as an issue.
Biodiversity, something that's raised its head recently. I mean, on this site, yes, I realise there's a lot of hedgerow and everything else there, but a significant amount of ground is going to be lost to hard surfaces. You may have addressed this and perhaps I've missed it, but perhaps you could expand on it.
The ground at the moment is used for grazing. It's fairly low-level agricultural land. So the planting of additional and reinforced hedging and planting of trees within the site will actually aid the biodiversity of the site. I don't think there is a significant loss of biodiversity by the development of this site.
Right, and lastly, the proportions, the report shows up to 2022, and it's been discussed further this morning regarding beyond that. It shows South Wiltshire taking so many sites. We've been told that it's 81 for Wiltshire. I think, is it correct to say that should this be approved, we should then have 15 sites, which I would imagine will be quite a significant proportion of what is required for South Wiltshire. That's if this 81 is going to be broke down as it has been up to 2022, I think it was.
Well, that is for the debate for the development plan document that is going to Cabinet next week, and looking at site allocations. At the moment, because you don't have a development plan document, we're using the criteria-based policy only, and we're having to look at any application that comes in that meets the criteria that then aids towards meeting your overall need of the 81 units. So allocation of sites hasn't come forward yet, is in the process of doing so, but because the emerging DPD has very little weight at the moment, we haven't seen it yet. Yeah, you can't consider site allocations yet. You're going to just consider the application on its merits. Does it meet your criteria 47 and the national guidance?
Thank you.
Councillor C. Jonathan, you wanted to come back? Okay. Yes, I've seen you, Christopher. I'll come to you in just a minute. James, Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Tara, could you go to the entrance, the actual entrance gate for us, and put that on screen? I was reading through the details, and one of the objections was this particular wall that's been built for the entrance. There was mention about planning permission. So my technical question was, is planning permission required for this wall? And so it's not. So they could continue extending this wall all the way around the site without permission.
This wall, as it stands on that site, doesn't require planning permission as it stands, because it's 2 metres high. It's no more than 2 metres high and it's set back from the highway. But if planning permission is granted today for the site as proposed, there is a condition that says no walls, means of enclosure, etc., can be constructed without planning permission to avoid that issue. Because as I mentioned in my presentation, what we wouldn't want to see is a stockade type approach to the landscaping of the site. It needs to be natural and gentle.
Because my concern is that that does give the image of a stockade from the road, and it does stay on item 7 of Core Policy 47. It will not have an unacceptable impact on the character and appearance of the landscape, and is sensitively designed to mitigate any impacts on its surroundings. And I really feel this doesn't do any of that, and that's on the roadside. It's what most people will see as they drive past. And I would much prefer to see that removed and replaced by a more sensitive entrance. I have a real problem with these types of structures on the road. They are a real eyesore as you drive past. And I don't believe it actually complies with that part of being sensitively designed to mitigate impact on surroundings. I have a real problem with that. Thank you.
The problem, Councillor, is it exists. And it existed on the previous application site where that condition was not. So they're not doing anything wrong. They don't require planning permission for that. They're not in breach of any previous condition on the previous consent. But what we're proposing now is that could not be continued on as part of this development if you grant consent for the application before you.
And my final query about the wall is restricted visibility onto the highway. the highway officer is quite happy that if you could go back to the slide before, I think it is the one before, which shows the proximity of the end of the wall to the, you're quite happy with the fact that that doesn't actually impact the visibility and the safety of vehicles leaving the site.
Your highway officer's been to the site whilst that wall has been in existence.
Okay.
And has assessed it as acceptable.
Thank you.
Councillor Newbury, Christopher, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mention has been made of planning gypsies and what they are. We clearly have both national policy and local Wiltshire Core Strategy policy, which gives special treatment to people who are planning gypsies, and the definition seems to be set out in condition 10, persons of a nomadic habit of life, whatever their race or origin, and the condition requires that this development would only be occupied by persons who meet the test. But I understood the case officer to say that we don't really need to worry about whether people are planning gypsies or not. And Mr. Doe, I can see it doesn't matter whether Mr. Doe is a planning gypsy because he may or may not be living here. But surely if we have a special sort of rules for particular groups of people, we need to have some confidence that the people who are benefiting from them are that group of people. And I'm just wondering, can somebody tell me what do we do to confirm that the occupants are planning gypsies? I mean, mention was made of the applicant's extended family. Presumably, an extended family would not comply with that test simply by being an extended family. Presumably, the extended family would have to be of nomadic habit in the same way. I mean, this is not an ethnic test. This is a practical test, isn't it? And I'm just wondering what we do after the occupation to make sure that that condition 10 is complied with.
We're aware that Mr. Doe is of gypsy status. That was considered as part of the previous application when the site was established, and discussions were had with representatives of the wider gypsy community and recognised Gypsy Council to give Mr. Doe and his family bona fides as Romany gypsies.
But the test is not whether someone's a Romany, it's a test of whether someone's nomadic. Do we know what the nature of Mr. Doe's nomadic lifestyle is?
We don't need to, because they can now the definition has been changed to allow the settled status of the family. And that was the change that was made in December last year to the definition, because it was held to be discriminatory to not to exclude gypsies who, through age or infirmity, etc., had chosen to stop travelling.
Yeah, that's in condition 10.
Yes.
Including such persons who, on grounds only of their own or their families' or dependents' educational or health needs or old age, have ceased to travel. But, I mean, presumably, other than people who have special health needs and special education needs and special old age, presumably everybody else has to be nomadic, don't they?
Yes, and if you have a group of families living together, it is quite often the case that parts of the older members of the family have stopped travelling, but the younger members of the family still travel. So the group you have living on the site together would meet the definition, because you would have people at different stages of their travelling life as part of that community. So it's not unusual for mothers, grandmothers to stay on site to look after the children, while the men and the older teenage sons go travelling. But you might have part of that family would not move, but part of the family would be moving. So that would meet the criteria of the travelling population to meet the criteria that's set out in the planning policy.
Okay, well, I'm still a bit confused, because clearly persons doesn't mean a family. Persons means persons, and, you know, each person who is not old-aged or at school or suffering from special health needs to be nomadic, don't they?
Yes, and it's also been held that you're not on the road all the time. You know, I've dealt with appeal decisions elsewhere in previous authorities where we have been looking at travellers who are travelling to specific fairs for specific purposes, and they may only travel for 2 or 3 months of the year, but it's been held that they are travelling for the purposes of work, and therefore they meet the criteria of travelling. So it's not someone having to be on the road all the time. They can be settled on that site for quite a large proportion of the year, and as long as they are travelling for the purposes of work, of employment, or dealing at fairs, etc., that is held to be within the definition of a travelling person for the purposes of planning legislation.
Okay, well, thank you for the answer. It just sounds as if anybody can now be a planning gypsy just by travelling for work for 1 or 2 months of the year. It seems a bit odd.
Well, you can, of course, now have settled travellers, so that's a very broad umbrella. I don't think we have any more questions, so I'm going to pass on to our first speaker, if I may, Quinton Skinner. Thank you.
Press the right-hand button.
Right-hand button. Ah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think it's fair to say that almost all of the issues have been covered in some detail in a communication from a group set up called Save Mears Countryside, which has been published on your website, I think, at the beginning of this week. And in that, I won't go over again the many areas where there is complete disagreement with the planning officer's view and presentation as to why this application should be recommended. I mean, I won't waste people's time by being repetitive, but I would certainly emphasize the highway safety issue. It's very interesting that the second access, which we are assured in the planning officer's report, has been sealed and removed. My understanding of being sealed and removed is that the hedgerows, the verges, the entrance should just disappear. That is certainly not the case, contrary to what you've heard. The gateway is still there, the gate posts are still there, there's no hedge in front of it, there's a hard surface coming all the way through to the road, and all that's happened is that 3 half rails have been just hammered across between the gate posts, which can be removed within a minute, I would have thought, by anyone with a hammer. So the highway, quite apart from that, the highway dangers are very significant, as has been acknowledged on repeated occasions by your highways department, and somehow you then managed to find someone from the highways department to say, oh no, this is all right. In this latest case, the considerations of the design manual for roads and bridges have been ignored, and he has merely said that driving round at 44 miles an hour is comfortable for him. Well, it's a 50-mile-an-hour limit, and lots of cars drive perfectly legally at 50 miles an hour around that bend from the north, and therefore this is in complete contravention of the design manual for roads and bridges. And if I can just refer to one more point, which is on the drainage. We've had a succession of statements on the drainage which are based on inaccurate or just false data. Certainly the data for the water infiltration was completely impossible given the land that the site is on. And the latest or the last report to be relied on, which actually was the one which got the eventual approval of the drainage department, refers to a drain along the a ditch along the northern side of the site. Such a ditch does not exist at all, and there is no running water there at all, and thus the only remaining justification that the drainage people raised in their initial objection back in December 2022, the last vestige of that this relies on is actually false. So there is no proper drainage solution for this concentration of people bringing in extra water into such a small site with absolutely nowhere for all of this to disappear to. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinton. Appreciate that. I'm going to ask Linda to come back to the drainage issue, if I may. Leave it for now, Linda. I'll come back to you in a minute. I'll ask Dr. Simon Rushton to speak, please.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of this application. When I've previously been in front of this committee, careful and thoughtful consideration has been given to Gypsy and Traveller matters, and I hope that this tradition continues today. First, some quick comments with regard to some of the questions raised. A first point is that it is not standard practice to count pitches without permission towards meeting need. Houses without planning permission would not be counted as meeting housing need. The cost of providing Gypsy and Traveller children with access to education should not be material to your consideration. With regard to day rooms, there is no national or development plan requirement for day rooms. And in my experience of a decade and a half of working on behalf of Gypsies and Travellers, there are many sites that do not have day rooms. It is very much the choice of the individual as to whether they require one. Day rooms are for the private use of pitch occupiers, and they're not community facilities. You might expect community facilities on, say, a local authority site that's being built, but certainly not on private sites, and I've certainly not come across this. Sufficient facilities for day-to-day use of the private family can be used within a mobile home. And of course, there's an option to apply for a day room in the future. As the officers rightly pointed out, there's no good planning reasons to apply a personal condition in this case. With regard to bin storage, we'll be happy to see a relevant condition. We would also be content to remove the wall and replace with hedging, and this could be specifically included in the wording of condition 4. With regard to the definition, this is standard to almost every case that I've dealt with in Wiltshire. Whether or not the occupants of the site meet the definition is an enforcement matter as opposed to a development control matter. I can, however, inform the committee that the intended occupiers are members of the applicant's family who meet the PPTS definition. On the definition, the case law is clear. Travelling can be seasonal and can be from a settled base. Turning to my main comments, I'm going to take an unusual approach of dealing directly with the late objection on behalf of Save Mears Countryside. I note that this group exists in order to object to untoward planning applications. The word untoward does not feature within planning law or policy. And you will, of course, be aware that the job of the committee is to consider whether the proposal is compliant with the development plan, not whether it's untoward. The central thrust of the objection is explicit threat to the council. The letter states, should Wiltshire Council see fit to pass this application, we fully intend to launch a judicial review of the whole procedure and indeed already have a barrister retained in this regard. This route is likely to be considerably more costly and inconvenient for Wiltshire Council than dealing with an unjustified planning appeal. I'd make 2 points about this. The planning committee should not regard the threat of judicial review as being material to your consideration. It is indeed most unedifying to see a submission which asks you to pursue the alleged less expensive option. A committee should not be the subject of bullying or threatening letters from anyone. The second is that in any event, the threat does ring hollow, that there's no legal opinion provided, nor is there expert evidence provided on the two technical objections of highways drainage and drainage that the letter makes. What the letter invites you to do is refuse on the basis of matters that your expert officers have already dealt with in detail. This application has been the subject of much scrutiny by the council's expert officers, and we've worked hard to meet their requirements. The only expert evidence before the committee is that of the council's own officers and the applicants. And we would suggest to you that there's no evidential basis provided by the objectors to refuse the application with. I would also note that many of the other points are entirely immaterial to your consideration. So to conclude now, I would respectfully ask the committee to fulfil its statutory duty of considering this application against the relevant development plan policy, or whether material considerations indicate otherwise, which is what your officers have done in great detail. In the event of you finding some form of conflict, you also need to consider the long-standing need for pitches, something which the council has struggled to address historically. This application represents a golden opportunity to meet a significant proportion of your increased need for pitches at no expense to anyone other than the applicant. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate that. John Jordan, please.
Oh, thank you. Just for those who don't know, I'm the chair of Mere Town Council, and Mere Town Council has already provided you with, on several occasions, with written comments. But I'm here to sort of put some human sentiment behind that. You're a hard act to follow, I'd have to say. But I'm not going to read chapter and verse, but I'm going to say how it feels to the people of Mere. When it first, a long time ago, arose that there was going to be a single pitch, there was quite a consternation in the town. Some of that, sadly, is because there are people who don't like travellers. But some of that was because of concerns about the road. The road is an issue, and I'll raise it again in a few moments. But there were some of us, like me, who thought, well, no, this is the time to do the right thing. And certainly a caravan arrived, fences went up, sheep arrived, and we thought this is the right thing. It felt good. It felt as if Mere was contributing. Sadly, after a short amount of time, well, a few years, a lot of hardcore arrived. And before you knew it, a lot of the surface became, well, it was a hard standing surface that you could drive vehicles on. And the sheep disappeared, and it changed. Now, you might wonder how I know all this. Well, I know all this because it's a very, very, very visible sight. As you drive by it in any direction, or if you walk even a quarter of a mile away on the fields where there's a footpath, you can see the site. It's very, very open. And that's to green things. I'm just wondering what it'll look like with white and silver caravans. But that's a personal issue. So we move on from there, and we have an application for 10. Well, 10 houses or 10 residences or whatever sounds bigger than a lot of the villages near Mere, and certainly much bigger than any of the hamlets near Mere. So this is quite a significant arrival. And again, I'll state, a significant arrival on a very busy road. So let me move on. Just recently, we had an application, and it has been built for a site with 4 pitches. That's on a quiet little road, a few hundred yards away. It was referred to earlier on. Now, everybody who's walked past that has said, well, this seems sensible. We're providing a safe place. This does seem appropriate. So that's Mere having provided, well, we haven't paid anything for it. As it was pointed out, we've paid nothing. But there's 1 and now 5 sites, 5 pitches. So that is a contribution to the need that is, we're all aware of it. There is a need, but we feel that 5 has arrived. Now, to add on another 10, that just seems, it's the scale of it that frightens people. If it was 2 or 3, I think nobody's backs would have got up. But 10 sounds like a community and all of the dealings with the community. And I heard Councillor Councillor Jeans refer to the litter, the picking up. Well, if you look at 11 wheelie bins and another 11 wheelie bins for recycling and 11 glass bottle, that's a huge amount of stuff at the side of the road. And imagine how long that vehicle would have to be on that road collecting that. I'm certain that the people who do the collecting would not be happy bunnies about that. It is a fast-moving, busy road. And the particular sort of traffic that I'm talking about is the fact that we have quarry lorries. Quarry lorries come up and down that road all day long. They are big, they are fast, and they're heavy laden. And they come over the hill from Gillingham direction, empty, I know, and they do perhaps they do more than 50 miles an hour. So I feel that there are 2 things the people of Mere would give to you. 1, the scale of this seems inappropriate. Not the fact that it's there, right? We're quite happy to contribute to the need, but the scale of it, 10, seems too many. Secondly, the location. The location is a dangerous road. It is a very, very dangerous road. And if anybody here would like to try and walk from there to the bus stop, well, I challenge you to do it, because you would be scared out of your wits by the time you got halfway there. This is not an accessible site, not for a pedestrian, I can assure you that. Well, thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, John. Before I go to our local member, I'd like to come to you, Bridget. Would you be prepared to speak now? Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Chairman. I was going to expand, really. I didn't know what John Jordan was going to say, but my main thrust is about the high-speed road, which is B3092, which leads, it takes traffic off the A303 to Gillingham. Tara, do you think you could go back to the first photograph, which shows the hill? That's the one. No, that one. So that shows the hill. Now, Gillingham is a local service centre in North Dorset, which is rapidly expanding. It has at least 2,200 new homes being added to the size of the community. There are 4 supermarkets already in Gillingham, and the Waitrose there is large, has been expanded. It's a very, very successful Waitrose. There's Asda, Lidl and Aldi already. There are 2 garden centres. But perhaps more importantly as well, there is a company called Dextra Lighting, which occupies a vast amount of space on the Brickfields Industrial Centre in Gillingham. It has over 500 employees, and so they have vehicles obviously leaving and coming back to the factory site, and also they have inbound materials being delivered to the site as well. So there, and John Jordan mentioned the aggregate lorries or the quarry lorries that go up and down the road to Gillingham, which are servicing all the new development that goes on there. Now, you can see from that photograph that there is a hill there, and so it's not coming from Gillingham. And all those HGVs, not to mention the normal car traffic, comes hurtling down that hill. And I would defy anyone who is trying to pull out a caravan, especially with the intensification of use on this site for an extra 10 pitches, trying to pull out of there with a caravan possibly, and an HGV approaching from the south is going to find it very difficult to stop. And also, I completely agree with John Jordan about any children who you cannot walk along that road. There is no proper footpath, and traffic does go whistling past there at a rate of knots. So I would like, I'm saddened actually, there hasn't been a proper traffic survey done along the B3092, and I really would like to recommend that one is carried out before the committee makes a decision on this, because you need to know the speed of the vehicles going along there and the extent of the HGVs that use this road. It is a very fast road, it's dangerous. Now, the Jane Oaks application that has been referred to is, as Mr. Jordan has said, off the main road, and it's in a quieter location. It may be 200 metres further away from Mere, but actually it's much easier to get into Mere from there than it is from this site. This site is very dangerous. And the only other comment I just wanted to make was to just emphasise that it does say on the bottom of the email from Henning Tots that he does advise the plan is still at an early stage in the process, the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, and therefore carries very limited weight in decision-making. Now, I know Linda did make reference to that, but she has emphasised the additional need for pitches. So I want to emphasise that it carries very limited weight in decision-making. Thank you, Chairman. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Bridget. So you then, George, Councillor Jeans.
Or do you want to, can I read my statement out, or do you want a proposition put forward first?
No, read your statement out first.
Right, you are, that's right.
Yep. Could you, yes, sorry, Quintin, could you turn
Oh,
your
I'm so sorry.
mic off? Thank you.
Right. The Mere Town Council and Zeals have voted against this application. I'm not going to go into all that again, but I'll try and stick to what I consider as relevant planning policy. The Wiltshire Core Strategy, Core Policy 47 states, proposals for new gypsy and traveller pitches or travelling show people plot yards will only be granted where there is no conflict with other planning policies and where no barrier to development exists. New development should be situated in sustainable locations with preference generally given to previously developed land or vacant or derelict site in need of renewal. Proposals must satisfy the following criteria. Well, all this has been read out. I know no significant barriers to development exist in terms of flooding, poor drainage, poor ground stability, or proximity to other hazardous land or installations where conventional housing would not be suitable. Mere Town and Council states there is photographic evidence showing historic flooding of this site, and that's for the previous application and for this one. Little 2 of the same policy. It is served by safe and convenient vehicle and pedestrian access. The proposal should not result in significant hazard to other road users. There is no pedestrian access footway along this highway towards Mere or Milton on Stour. The footpath access to cross at a distance on a busy 3902 is on clay and often waterlogged in places. The vehicular access is not considered to be safe by Mere Town Council and their local knowledge. The site is just off the B3092 with access directly from and onto the B3092. This stretch of road has a 50 miles an hour speed limit and is the main access route from Mere to Gillingham, Dorset. It is also routinely used by private cars, commercial vehicles and HGVs travelling from the Mere direction. The A303 trunk road or the Froome direction to Gillingham, Shaftesbury, Blandford and Poole to Dorset. So note, I'm emphasising, is a main arterial road that basically goes from Poole up through the Bristol as one of its purposes. The road has no pedestrian pavement or footpath. The road has an accident record. Local knowledge can confirm there have been a number of fatality accidents on this stretch of road during the last 40 years. The application site is both close to the brow of a hill in the Gillingham direction south and a blind corner on the Mere side north, and the Town Council's concern regarding highway safety for a number of movements that we generated in and out of this site. The B3092 road at the junction nearby, which is a T-junction for Mere or Froome in the other direction, will benefit from a voluntary Section 106 development contribution. The contribution to be used to try and address the conflict of speed of traffic entering the junction from the Gillingham direction and conflict with pedestrians travelling west to east. This fact amplifies the volume and speed of traffic. An extract from media recently, emergency services raised to the scene on B3092 Mafferdon Hill between Mere and Milton on Stour at around 9:15 p.m. on Friday the 29th of September. The fatal collision happened just south of the Wiltshire Borsett in Dorset, sparking a significant 999 response, including Dorset Somerset Air Ambulance. Highways have on the original application for one pitch objected and slowly agreed, which is what has happened with this application. Normally, Highways non-objection goes a long way to a planning application being approved. In this case, I think the committee should consider the Highways approach, and it is flawed. Highways are now working on less than 50 miles an hour limit of the road. Local knowledge of Mere Town Council knows the number of vehicles that exceed anticipated and may limit. Little 3. I assume I'm not tied to the 5-minute limit, am I? The site can be properly serviced and is supplied with essential services such as water, power, sewage and drainage and waste disposal. The site must also be large enough to provide adequate parking, vehicle parking, including circulation space, along with residential amenity and play areas. There are only 2 car parking spaces per pitch, largely because of the density proposed. Families will have more than this, as is common knowledge. These may park off-site in the road, leading to further problems. Many will use vehicles because of the distance to service and there is no effective public transport service, even though there is a bus stop opposite. I do not consider the number of buses that Cole would be considered adequate. Little 4. It is located in or nearer to an existing settlement within reasonable distance of a range of local services and community facilities, in particular schools and essential health services. I have asked, as a technical question, have these been consulted? And the answer we're told is that they're supposed to be provided afterwards. So I assume that's not a planning question, which I'll have to, a planning point, which I'll have to concede to. Little 5, it will not have an unacceptable impact on the character and appearance of the landscape and the amenity of neighbouring properties and is sensitively designed to mitigate any impact on the surroundings. In the comments submitted, concern was expressed as follows regarding visual intrusion, loss of amenity and site screening. The site is an open countryside and falls just outside the Cranbourne Chase and West Woutes Downs of area of outstanding natural beauty, now designated a national landscape. All of the site is bordered by mature hedgerows from the AB 3092, hedgerows deciduous with tall and spindly rather than thick and compact, is therefore visible from the road in winter. So I trust that that is proposed and the conditions to be planted will not be deciduous. I hope not. It will give, all year round screening. That's a question the officer can answer after my presentation. Furthermore, the site will be visible from local beauty spots on Castle Lynn Mere and the surrounding hill at the South Wiltshire Downs. The planning inspector, which has been raised, when considering the appeal by Richborough Estates for the development of land at Castle Hill Mere, application reference 16-12217-out, which is 1,300 metres away, noted that this area was a pastoral landscape opening outwards towards the district county border and the Cranbourne Chase area of outstanding natural beauty. The planning appeal by Richborough Estates for land at Castle Street Mere was dismissed by the planning inspector. Yet it was larger. However, 10 extra sites is also significant. Mere Town Council have implied gypsy and traveller site development would have a detrimental impact and harm on the character of the landscape when viewed from Castle Hill, and will fail to conserve the locally distinctive character of the landscape setting. A nearby planning appeal, which I've mentioned, Richborough Estates, which was refused, not because Wiltshire had an alleged shortage of land for housing at the time, as is alleged now the shortage for gypsy and traveller sites. It was refused on the basis mainly that it would cause harm to the landscape character of the area and a very significant level of harm to the setting of Mere Conservation Area, Mere Castle, both designated heritage assets, and the latter a scheduled ancient monument, the highest order of heritage designation. Mere Town Council has confirmed that the application site is visible from Castle Hill and Long Hill. So I would argue it's subjective as to how you would interpret that. The access and egress, which is greatly increased on this fast road, has been a grey area for a Wiltshire Highway consultation, in my opinion. Regarding the 2015 application and the one they have refused, then they changed their mind when persuaded the traffic was slower than Mere Town Council and locals know what speed is achieved. The local CPRA also raised concerns which you would have read in the report. If allowed, the density of the site should be less. I asked through the chair to the officer, could this application be passed for the lesser site? Well, obviously, that will be answered afterwards. Has Core Policy 47 a statement that with preference generally given to previously developed land or a vacant or derelict site in need of renewal being explored, or is the fact that the 2015 permission site given for limited use of one pitch being accepted as previously developed land when it was clearly restricted for reasons given the 2015 application? The fact we have not a 5-year land supply for Gypsies and Travellers site is, I understand, calculated by a respected third party employed by the council. This information is gained by information given by Gypsies and Traveller community, not including new age travellers. Is this correct? And if so, what would the tolerance or inaccuracy estimated to be?
George, can I ask you to draw your comments to a close,
Yeah, I'm
please?
coming close to the end of it now. I accept it could be more or less. However, it would indicate that it's not exact science. Mere Town Council commented, it is believed that electricity is very recent to be installed to services the wonder resident, and supply would be necessary to serve the proposed along with sewage, drainage, water. Is the officer sure the condition in place would be strong enough for enforcement to insist this is done before the development commences? And I mean, would you want me to, I won't expand anything else that I put on here, if that's okay, but do you want me to put a proposition forward?
Not at the moment, George. I will come back to you, though. If you've got a proposal to come forward, I'll ask you for that. Linda, without spending too much time on this, there's a number of points been raised. I've picked up on drainage. That was one early on. And there have been a few others that George has mentioned. Just wanted non-deciduous hedging. Do you want to come back on anything, Steve?
Yes, if we start with the non-deciduous hedging first, one of the conditions proposed is the landscaping scheme is submitted to be approved by this council, and it will be unusual to include deciduous hedging in that type of location. So I think we could exclude non-deciduous from that location. Yeah, conifers would look very out of place. Yeah, we wouldn't want to lay Andai hedge along there, no. That would look odd. If we go back to the comments made about the highway assessment, unusually on this site, the highway officer, who is one of the team leaders for the major projects team and is a sustainable transport officer, because I've just reminded myself who gave me the assessment, has been to the site. I don't think we could say that happens with every application, but this one, due to the comments that we had received, the officer did go on site, did make an assessment. He is an experienced, qualified highway engineer, and he has made his comments clear, which I have set out for you in full in the report, and he has no highway objection to the scheme on highway safety or accessibility in and out of the site. And I think that is something that members should bear in mind when considering the application. And drainage issue, again, there was a lot of toing and froing on this application between the council's drainage engineers and their drainage consultants and the applicant's drainage consultants to make sure that an appropriate scheme would work. The scheme was objected to as originally submitted. It's been through about 6 iterations, I would say, to get to where we are now. And a lot more work has been put in by the applicants to demonstrate that the scheme will work, and our engineers were not happy for quite a while that the scheme would work, but what we have before you today is a significant improvement on that was originally submitted, and your drainage engineers have no objection, subject to the condition, just to sort of topping and tailing the scheme in detail.
Thank you, Linda. In which case, I'm going to come back to you then, Councillor Jeans, if I may, for a proposal.
Well, in view of the fact that I have learnt today, and it appears that only expert regarding the highways issues. Only expert information will be looked at. We have an expert's opinion that was taken from the applicant's side, and we were told that is quite usual. But those that are against this on highways, I believe, are not aware that they had to produce a report from an expert. And therefore, I'm asking, in view of what Councillor Bridget Wayman has highlighted, where this application should be deferred, to give that group a chance to put forward professional advice, because as I see, this committee will just completely disregard anything other than professional advice which has been given by the applicant.
I'm not happy about deferral, I must say, but would there be a seconder for that? No, there's not. Councillor Newbury, Christopher.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jeans was saying that the highway people, I've looked at the highway comments, and they're very, it's a one line, no objections subject to conditions. And the conditions are essentially visibility display and the consolidation of the entrance. But Councillor Jeans was saying that the highways officers have changed their view, having been persuaded that traffic was moving more slowly. And I'm just wondering, the case officer is shaking her head as if that must be wrong. How have we got to the... Councillor Wayman was saying that the traffic is fast here and she would like to see a traffic survey. Councillor Jeans is saying that the highways have changed their view because they think it's travelling more slowly than Mere Town Council said. Could we hear a little bit more about that before we decide whether we need to defer for more information about the highway safety?
As I set out in respect to criteria 4 on my agenda, I don't know what page it is because, sorry, I copied this one myself. I quoted in full the final highway engineer's comments in respect to this application. And this is from one of the team leaders of the Special Projects Group and Sustainable Transport Group, who are fairly expert at dealing with major schemes. And he says, I refer to the above planning application, in particular to the Access Review Report dated February 2023, submitted on behalf of the applicants by the Hurlston Partnership. You'll be aware that the initial highway response dated the 7th of the 12th, 2022, recommending refusal on highway grounds. The application included consideration of the ARR has now been allocated to me. I have reviewed the ARR, visited the site, carefully measured the available access visibility and considered what level of visibility could be improved within the extents of the highway land or the red line areas of the site. The road past the site is subject to a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, which requires 160-metre visibility to the near side carriageway edge based on DMRB, which is Roads and Bridges guidance. So it's the national standard guidance on construction of accesses onto B-class roads. And in new brackets, it says, unless the speeds can be considered to be lower, in which case a lower visibility standard can be considered. The northbound approach is of straight alignment and carries traffic well up to the 50 mile per hour speed limit. In this direction, the current available visibility is 99 metres. Minimal cutback of vegetation, which is grown out over the highway verge, will provide the required 160 metres visibility. Turning to the southbound approach, the bend on the north slows vehicle speeds. I consider the southbound speeds around the bend to be in the order of 44 miles per hour, which requires a visibility distance of 120 metres. This distance is available from the access when measured to the southbound carriageway, as the ARR sets out in some detail at sections 2.14. I have also noted the details provided in the ARR regarding southbound braking distances. And he then goes on to talk about criteria within policy CP44. He says that having considered this policy and above facts, do not consider an objection on transport sustainability grounds could be satisfied. The proposal internal layout is satisfactory. The site includes a secondary point midway along the road frontage, which is substandard visibility to the north. I consider the closure of this access should be secured. That's the one that has been secured. And then he says, I have no highway objections subject to the following conditions. So the highway officer has assessed it. It's not just a one line, I have no objection. He has been to the site, has assessed it, and considers there is no highway objection. And that's from a senior officer within that team. He's one of the team leaders for that team. So I could not, as a planning officer, question that highway officer's views.
Okay, thank you for that. I was looking at the summary on page 35, which clearly refers to something somewhere else. The town council's comments tell us the road has an accident record, a number of fatal accidents on this stretch of road during the last 40 years. Are highway officers aware of that?
When our highway officers look at applications, they do normally refer to any accident records because they quite often quote those back to us in their comments. So I would assume that that has been considered as part of this assessment.
But the town council refers to it and the highway officer doesn't. It seems a bit strange.
I can't comment on what the highway officer's commented. All I can say is he's been to the site, he's assessed it, he knows the site, he's assessed it, and based on information submitted with the application in a standard format, he's considered it against national guidance and raises no objection.
Thank you for that.
Chairman, just for clarity, do we have a proposal and is it seconded or we still,
I'm just going to come.
debating?
I'm going to.
Thank you.
I'm just going to come to that because Christopher had some questions on the back of George's proposal, which was to defer this pending a report or some kind of a survey. And so my question was, do I have somebody to second that?
Yeah, I think I will second that, Chairman, just so the committee can take a view on it.
You would second that, right? Okay, so we do have a proposal and a seconder. Councillor C, Jonathan, I've seen your agent. I'll come back to you in a minute.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting application. I think it's very difficult to oppose it in principle. I think we can't oppose, I think we would not be where we are going if it were to be refused. We are not going to see this being opposed on straightforward highways grounds because we've got a detailed report which we have to take into consideration. We're not going to be able to oppose this on grounds of the numbers. However, I think the density is in conflict with some of the smaller points in the core policy. And I've got the core policy in front of me, with the facilities, that play areas that are expected to be provided, cannot be provided. And I come back to concern, the only area of real concern I have is raised it earlier on, is the bus stop, which we said there is a bus stop. We're then told it's not safe to get there. So that brings us into another area, and the only area that, in my opinion, if people wish to oppose this, we could, is that I think it's that we cannot allow a development which would make it unsafe for the residents. In assessing sites for travelling, show people must not result in an inaccessible loss of amenity and adverse impact on the safety and amenity of the site's occupants and neighbouring properties. Well, if we're going to say they have to get to a bus stop or may want to get to a bus stop, then that would be, from what we've been told, unsafe. The only area that I can see, and I've also actually, regardless of what the officer said, I'm not over keen to be seen to be granting permission, and I actually don't accept that you don't have to, it's not a material consideration of schooling, and I've looked at the core policy, and it is a material consideration that adequate schooling is available. And I don't think it is without the council being expected to bear the cost. So I think if I were to be persuaded to support this, I'd want a condition that the applicants bore the cost, any additional costs as a result of any additional amenity or schooling costs. And I don't think that's unreasonable. Why would we, as a council, say, yes, you can have a proposal which in principle I can't see we can oppose. But there are things that come into it, like who's providing X, Y, Z. I think if this was a settled community, we would be saying, yes, but you've got to build a pavement, which I've seen happen before, to the bus stop. Now, that's not going to be practical. So there may be other ways through it. That's slightly rambling. I won't support deferral because I think we need to make a decision here. And my concern revolves around that specific provision. The rest, I don't see an argument against, and I certainly don't see an argument on highways grounds, given the detail that the officer's gone into. And I'll give way.
Thank you, Councillor Seed. Before I come to you, Adrian, Sarah, did you want to come in on this? Our legal team.
Thank you, Chair. It was just on the point of education and whether the provision of schooling for the children that live at the property could be a material consideration, and the law shows that it can't be. Any function that the council should carry out in terms of its educational functions to provide schools for children can't be a reason for refusal of a planning application. We can't take that into account, I'm afraid.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I'm aware that a number of things, issues that we may consider to be material considerations aren't in this case. And that's one of them. Thank you, Sarah. Adrian, Councillor Foster.
Please do refer to me as Adrian Howard. Yet again, Councillor Seed has very kindly stolen my thunder on many of the subjects. I have the same concerns as he has about density, and I have the same concerns as we mentioned about education, but I am also aware there is a fund for traveller and gypsy communities for additional facilities. So if it was even if an appeal for transport was to fail, there is an alternative means of funding or finding a way around it. So the council does meet that requirement already, yes. So that's fine. I'm concerned that the proposal about deferment, I would much prefer, and I don't know how this works, if an alternative proposal for a vote was to put forward, I'd prefer to propose that we go ahead with this application regardless of the concerns we have, of which we have many, and we understand, and as with all applications, we understand all the concerns.
All right,
no
I'll come back to you in just a minute then. We'll just vote on this proposal first. No, I'm not going to take any more debate on this. I want to come back on the proposal that has been put forward to defer this application. Any in favour of that, please show. 2, and any against? Right, so that proposal has been lost. So I will come back to you now, Adrian, and ask for a revised proposal.
I fully understand all the reservations from both the Town Council, the individuals, and even the committee here. But given all the data and the facts, I don't think we have a choice but to propose that we accept the officer's recommendations in full.
And do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Shepherd, James. Right. Does anybody want to speak to this? Buff, you put your hand up just now. Did you want to talk?
Yes, please. I just had a question that I may have missed the answer for, but I mean, and I'd like to echo what Councillor Foster was saying, that it is very concerning, the highways issues, but we have no basis because of the officer's report to object on that basis. What I wanted to ask about was the landscaping scheme. We've heard from one of the speakers that it is visible already from footpaths. I know there's some hedging along the front. Is there hedging around all the sides going to be put in as part of the scheme, please?
There is a proposed condition to require a landscaping scheme to be submitted. And I think that the site plan that is available shows quite a lot of planting within the site as well as around the site. So that would be conditioned as part of any permission. Yes, and while we're on conditions, can I, Chairman, through you, if the application is going to be recommended for approval, can I ask the proposer whether you will accept the suggestion for a condition on the bin store, and an addition to condition 4 to remove that existing wall.
Yeah.
And also I have had a discussion with another member about the condition relating to, condition 12, relating to commercial vehicles, to make sure that they only relate to, so if there's construction traffic, that does not remain on site. And if the site takes a little while to build out, we don't have construction traffic on the site, and we don't have a mix-up between commercial vehicles and not. So if you're happy to accept 2 additional condition alterations, then
Yeah, there are 3 there.
3 there, if that's okay.
Bin store, the removal of the wall, and
The
commercial,
strengthening of the condition relating to
commercial vehicles.
I have no objections to that at all, especially given that the applicant suggested that they would comply to that. Can we clarify one aspect, and that was that it would be non-deciduous, it would be deciduous vegetation and not non-deciduous vegetation in the area, which would be effectively the same as putting up a 6-foot fence. So.
We could add that to the landscape condition.
Yeah. And James, you're comfortable with that?
I'm very happy, and I'm particularly relieved about the removal of the wall.
I thought you might be.
I'd like to thank you for that, because that will
I appreciate that.
enable me to be much more
Amenable.
to
Yes.
this particular application.
I thought of you at the time.
Is there any, when it's been removed, is there any condition about what it's replaced by?
That would be part of the landscaping condition.
Yeah,
There is already a condition that says no walls or fences without
Hedging
permission.
again, I guess.
And it would be, the landscaping condition addresses means of enclosure.
Yeah, I thought it would be, but I just wanted to double check, but thank you very much.
So thank you, members, for that. So just for clarity, just so that this can be reflected in the minutes, Councillor Jeans proposed that we defer it. It was seconded by Councillor Newbury. Those are the only 2 that supported it, so it failed. And now the motion is to the proposal that the planning officer has put forward with these 3 additions, amendment, or additions basically. Councillor Newbury, do you want to come back?
Well, I was just going to say, I think if you're minuting all that, Chairman, you need to include that Councillor Jeans's proposal was not simply defer full stop.
No,
It was
no, for a traffic
defer
survey.
for further
I think
for
Tara
further
had-
survey onto the traffic speed and the accident record.
I think Tara had that bit, yeah. Right, okay, without further ado then, I'm going to go to this proposal now, and I'm going to ask to vote on this proposal, which is as is, with these 3 amendments, just strengthening up the proposals as they are on the paper. So all in favour of this proposal, please show. That's pretty well a reverse of what we had before. And against? Abstentions? 2 abstentions then, please. So the motion has been carried with those 3 additions to it. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Appreciate that. I am going to call a comfort break at this point before we come back to the second application. Many thanks indeed. Safe journeys home for those that are leaving. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I just called a comfort break. Yeah. Yeah. Back at 1 o'clock, please. Right, gentlefolk, if you can all take your seats, please. I'm quite anxious to get going fairly sharpish. Right, folk, I'm going to get on with the next item now. So if I can have your attention, please, to this next item. I'm going to ask you to particularly focus your attention on this. You've got a very comprehensive report in front of you. Time is against us. That doesn't mean to say that we're going to rush things through unnecessarily, but we're going to have to be a little bit... Sorry? That would be good. No, slightly premature. But we do need to focus our thoughts on this one because I won't be allowing perhaps quite so much preamble. Having said that, this morning was very necessary. It was absolutely necessary that we gave it the time that we did. So without further ado then, East Farm Codford St Mary. And thank you, David. Thank you for your patience in waiting. I'll hand over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to update you all, there's no late list items to report. However, we do actually have the figures from the previous solar phases that weren't in the report, that the existing megawatt production from the first three phases are 30.8 megawatts, and this proposal will take us up to 48.8 overall. So as you can see, the application site is up here. This is phase one, this is phase two, phase three will be along here and down here. This is our glass houses, and this is our anaerobic digester. So as you can see on the site plan, actually on the top of Clay Pit Hill, with the digester, the glass houses in here, phase one, phase two, phase three, and with phase four. The existing tree belt is here, and you can see there's the public rights of way that honeycomb all the way around the site. So one of the key issues of the application is the avoiding the use of best and most versatile agricultural land. So Wiltshire Council records only have blanket grade 3 designations. There was no DEFRA Magic Maps classifications for anywhere around here. So the applicants undertook their own agricultural land classification with sample sites taken from every 100 meters on a square grid on the site, and came up with the findings that part of the site is grade 4, majority of the site is grade 3B, and approximately 3 hectares are about 15% of the site is actual grade 3 land. Just a site to show where the national landscape is, about 2 to 3 kilometres to the south, and our network of public rights of way that will cross all parts of this combined development overall. This is an extract from the Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment, which confirms that from the west, from the south, the southwest, and from the northwest, that there are no longer distant views capable from the site. There are obviously close and middle distance views from on the pass and when the open fields, as depicted by the yellow arrows here, with the only potential for long distance views coming from 3 and 3.5 kilometres from the east and the northeast of the site, depicted from here and here. So the proposed site layout, your standard Lafair solar panel layouts. This shows an existing tree belts along the sides of the site here. And then this is an extract from the proposed landscaping plan. That tree belt will be extended into this corner, and then with a 10-metre wide native woodland hedge planted along the eastern boundary, which will then also tuck in along the southern edge as well. So this is the part of our, I forgot to mention about the bund as well. That bund is about 1 kilometre long, and it runs all the way down to the glass houses. So standard cross-section plans of the panels and the fence details. So this is me standing with the end of the bund behind me, and phase 3 behind me, looking along the western edge of that tree belt. There is one gap in there, and that is the northern boundary hedge, which is that one. And a panoramic view along the Chip 14 that runs on that kind of in in a straight line, but as it's panoramic, you can see how the site is quite open. And then it's from the south-eastern corner of the site, looking back along Chit 13, or 14, sorry, with solar phase 3 on the left, and with the tree belts, etc., on the right, in front of you. And then it's looking towards, this is probably the most direct view towards Chittern itself. But as you can see with the contour, was still to rise at that point. The site rises at that point. And then looking directly northwards along Chit 13, sorry, our application site will be on the left here. And then this is looking back in the opposite direction towards the anaerobic digesters behind this tree belt here, as are the glass houses, but you can't see them. And I would hope one may agree that the phases of the solar panels that we can see are quite dark and merge reasonably well in with the tree belts behind. Just another panoramic view, trying to show that phase 3 with our application site on the right. So this is not the most northern part of the site itself, but at the most northern part of where the solar panel array will end. And this is where our tree belt will then be built to the left and up to the existing trees. You can see, this is the St Mary's Church, or All Saints Church, and the manor farm behind. So this is where our woodland planting would go to help screen the site from those eastern and northern views that are 3 kilometres distant. And then this is actually at the bottom. This is where the edge of where the proposed woodland planting would go and meet directly with the woodland planting. That's the only 2 buildings within Chittern that would be able to essentially see. There's a lot more in Chittern actually at the bottom of this valley. So this is looking from the eastern boundary into the site. Our A3 agricultural land is in that top northern corner. As I referred to, it benefits from the best screening of the site, for the reasons as to why we haven't sought to exclude it from the proposal. And then looking back up with the application site on the right. This is just a street view, Google Street View image to show. This is probably the closest view of the application site you can see from the D390 itself. That's the existing tree belt that will be extending to there, and then the solar panels will be behind the tree belt, and then back over the brow of the hill, because of the way the topography of the site lies, even though the site itself is sloping down, due to the ridges, the natural ridge that occurs roughly around here, we wouldn't necessarily see any depth of the site. You'll only be able to see probably the first ray in that initial short term whilst the landscaping comes to maturity. So this is just to show what the applicant has done. So this is back with the digester behind me, just to show when the bundle was being built for the glass houses. That is now soiled and landscaped. It has loads of whips on it. Unfortunately, there is a lot of weeds on it at the moment, but there are, a recent site visit, there are whip hedging in there, which should take hold and become part of the grassland landscaping of that bund. And this is a photo from last year, which shows actually the bund with nice grassing. This is before the whips were put in, but you can see that that's phase 1 and 2 behind the bund with the glass houses as well, which just demonstrates how well this site has actually merged itself quite successfully into the landscape without causing any undue harm. And this is this sort of side just to show how the applicant has taken his landscaping his landscaping proposal seriously. All the whips, I've walked up and down the entirety of all the whips are there. They may be slow to grow, but they are there and getting established. So this will be what will form our southern and eastern boundaries of our hedgerow planting. And sorry for the blurred image, and apologies for if I've cut anyone's patches off deliberately, but just try to emphasize this map shows all of our solar panel sites, applications, refusals and permissions, just to try and demonstrate that with the notion, what led to the council's notion was, I imagine, the concern of over 90, which is up here, and with the concentrations around the M4 and around between Trowbridge and Melksham areas. But yes, you can see in the south, this is our existing site and our proposed site. We don't have anything. We've got one or two other smaller areas, which I can't quite pick out on that map, but it's just to demonstrate that the cumulative impact in this part of Wiltshire is considered to be acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed, David. Any technical questions, please, members? Councillor Newbury, Christopher.
Thank you, Chairman. The applications had very few responses other than the statutory consultees. No residents have objected. No one has written into support either. And I'm just wondering, it says on the application that the address is East Farm, Codford, St Mary, and it says the parish council is Codford Parish Council. I understand that this is in fact entirely in Chitterne. So the address East Farm, Codford, St Mary is the applicant's address rather than the site address. And luckily, Chitterne Parish Council was consulted, but not as the main consultee. And I'm just wondering, can the officer take us through where the neighbour notifications were sent? Were they sent in Codford or Chitterne or both, or what was done? And where were the site notices posted?
So it was also Wiley Parish Council were also consulted as well.
Yeah, I was puzzled by that because that's a long way away. But anyway.
Well, I think the boundary, I would have to bring up the boundary map, but I think the boundaries show that it was reasonably close for them to be consulted. I put the site notice mainly up on the bottom of Mount Pitt Hill, because that's where the most public...
That's in Codford?
Yes, but it's part of it's the access route up to the site.
But it's a private road, isn't it?
From that point onwards, I believe so. Yes, I'd have to ask the applicants when they do the presentation. But there is that slip road up Mount Pitt Hill. I don't know what point it becomes private thereafter. I know there are signs from the point it then goes up the hill past the houses. Then that it is advertised as being a private road.
So you do know where it becomes private then?
Yeah, but I don't know whether it's I don't know whether the houses on Mount Pitt Hill are private road too. Well, no,
I think not.
Yeah.
Okay, so the site notices were posted at Codford, which is about 2 miles away from the site, I think?
Probably about 3 kilometres, approaching 2 miles, yes.
About 2 miles away. And what neighbours were notified?
I would have to I'd have to dip out the presentation and then I'll check the list, but in the previous ones we have, for the glass houses, for example, we have done Auckland Farm on the properties along Codford Road, etc. But the difficulty is that they have to have a physical boundary in which to be notified. So sometimes we can take options to expand the actual neighbour notification.
Okay, so let me, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the application site is at Chitterne. Did anybody at Chitterne have a neighbour notification?
I would have to dip out the presentation and look into this.
Okay, it seems a bit unlikely. Let me go. I wanted to tease out the planning policy, the national and local planning policy on landscape. And it's mostly, for those who want to quickly read it, we've got the comments of the National Landscape Officer on pages 70 to 71. We've got the planning officers, the case officers' comments on pages 80 to 81, and then a summary on 85 to 86. But let's go to page 81, and it quotes paragraph 180 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Planning decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes. So that seems fairly categorical. We either are or are not protecting and enhancing this valued landscape if it is one. And then a little bit lower down, we hear Save Policy C3 sets out that in addition to the nationally important AONBs, a number of other parts of the district are recognised as being of county-wide landscape importance. Under this policy, it could have been considered that the application site is a valued landscape. And then that is explained, it could have been considered, is explained by Wiltshire Council's local plan review recommends deleting Save Policy C3, which would remove the above assumption that the application site should be considered as a valued landscape. Now, could we possibly get to the bottom of this? I mean, in our existing planning policies, this is, I think, a valued landscape, and it's covered by paragraph 180 of the NPPF. But this is something that has to go through a examination in public of our local plan, isn't it? We don't know for certain whether policy C3 will be deleted. There are objections to the deletion of all of the special landscape areas. Can officers tell us whether paragraph 180 of the NPPF does actually at the moment apply to this land?
Yes, through you, Chair. I mean, the member's quite right. The old policies that are still with us, and there's C3 there, but there's also C6 down in the south as well, with special landscape areas, that they've been mooted as being removed for many years and haven't been, and they're still with us, and therefore they'll still be with us until they are removed, if they are as part of the local plan review. So the policies that you're looking at are still going to be C3. So I don't want to be there any ambiguity about that. It still exists at this point in time. So if you had an issue, for instance, with the landscape impact, you could quote C3 as part of any sort of decision on that, yes.
Okay, well, it's just that the whole report appears to be based on the fact that no harm is going to be done and that this is in accordance with planning policy. Let me go to, I was looking at national policy. Now let's go to our local policies. Core Policy 51, development, and this is one that isn't being proposed to be deleted. Development should protect, conserve, and where possible, enhance landscape character and must not have a harmful impact upon landscape character. That's not should, that's must not have. The report concedes that this application has a harmful impact. It says it's rather slight, but that's a matter of opinion, I suppose. But so do we not have another policy there which is against this, which is this is not in accordance with policy?
Well, so just to add on to what Richard said before, but if you, to be a valued landscape, you actually have to, case law suggests you have to have actual demonstrable physical attributes as well as to what makes that a valuable landscape. So just because it's a C3 designation doesn't automatically assume then it is a valued. There has to also then be specific. If it were right next door to the main road, for example, or or elevated and fully visual in front of Chitta, and then maybe you could go to beyond to say yes, that is then a valued landscape. But it's actually quite an relatively flat and relatively not very visible. So I'm trying to think of a word. Not very visible part of the open countryside. From that, so from what I was perhaps the word that the assumption should be considered. It may, it could have been considered was perhaps a better word, but would have been a better word there. And in terms of CP 51, I think
you're wanting to go back to the core policy, say policy C3. I mean, going back to that, David, you're saying that you're quoting this case Stroud versus the Secretary of State. A valued landscape should have demonstrable physical attributes. But I didn't challenge you on that because I thought that was really not worth arguing. But effectively, you're saying in the report that this site doesn't have any demonstrable physical attributes. But it's high chalk downland, isn't it? The report says that the C3 is being replaced by landscape character assessments, and the report tells us that the landscape character assessment is that this is high chalk downland. That's a demonstrable characteristic, isn't it?
Well, it's sorry, Rich.
Sorry, Chair. We might be in danger of entering into the debate in terms of answering these questions. I mean, obviously,
Well, I'm trying to tease out what the policy says. I'm not trying to argue the merits of the case. I'm simply trying to tease out whether this is or is not in accordance with policy. So let's go back then to Court Policy 51, and David was starting to reply to that. We have a policy that says that development must not have a harmful impact upon landscape character. And here's a report that says this does have a harmful impact on landscape. And I'm struggling to understand why it's in accordance with policy.
Well, we have, so both strategic and all the area committees, as soon as we have any application for, say, housing or anything that's on Greenfield, we officers always, I hope we consistently come and say, yes, there is always going to be a change from character from open countryside to an urban or built development. So from that point of view, there is always, by definition, some harm. But then the policy then has, with any negative impacts, mitigated as far as possible, to which those mitigation impacts are the proposed landscaping, and taking into account the considerations of how well successfully the existing development that's happened here has gone through. Of my nearly 10 years involvement on this site, because I started with the Ham glass houses, the only comments I received initially were complaints about the lighting, about the anaerobic digester, which was an application from 2010. So I've had no public fallout from people complaining when they seem they've gone in. I've had no correspondence. I've had nothing presented to me or suggesting public anger or public feeling towards this. So from that point of view, what one can reasonably conclude that those negative impacts of the views from the public rights of way, which adjoin and surround the site, have actually been mitigated through a combination of factors, which we're saying are present for this as well.
Okay, well, let me just have one further question. If we go to page 86, the sort of summary of this says that social benefits outweigh the harm. The social benefits associated with the proposal outweigh, the officer says, any limited harm. But what policy is that coming from? Can somebody tell me? Do we have a planning policy that says social benefits can outweigh the harm done to a valued landscape?
Chairman, in sort of general terms, I think the intention of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, but the intention of that statement is to simply say, well, you've got to weigh up everything with planning. The solar panels will always be visible either at close quarters or at some distance, but we always need to balance that against the benefit of the provision of renewable energy. So that's what we're generally getting at, and the government guidance is one of allowing renewable energy, and of course we've got our own policy CP42 that does that as well. So that's the social benefit. Maybe it's slightly wrongly worded, maybe in that context, but it's the public benefit of the sustainable nature of the development versus the inherent visual impact that always comes with these things.
What the National Planning Policy Framework says is that it's down to the local plan. These schemes are to be determined by the local plan. But I'm just asking the question, when it comes to this argument that social benefits can outweigh harm to, in this case, what we would call a valued landscape, what policy is that based on? What policy of the Wiltshire Court strategy says that social benefits outweigh harm?
It's broader than that. In the planning system, we always have got to weigh up and balance the negatives and the positives and the harms, etc. So that we do that with every application. So on this particular application, it is the obvious visual harm to a certain extent against anything else that balances that out and weighs against it or for it or whatever it is. So we do that on every application. So there's not a particular policy that specifies that. That's the way the planning system is arranged. So at the end of most reports, it will normally say the planning balance and that kind of thing at the end. So we weigh up the intrusion in the countryside against the provision of the solar panels and the sustainable energy production. So you've got CP42 in your policy, which promotes renewable energy. That is on one hand balanced there against the visual harm, and what we're saying in this case is the visual harm is limited, and therefore there's more weight to be given to CP42 because it's the improvement to the sustainable energy production. That's
Okay, Sharon, well, I'll leave it there, but I don't think the officer has identified a policy that says we need to have such a balancing exercise.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Councillor Shepherd, James.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting thing about harm to the natural landscape, because actually there is very little physical harm to the natural landscape because of the nature of the way solar panels are installed, much less than maybe an AD plant. So I'm actually thinking there's less impact physically to this particular application. And the visual harm is only visual harm for those who can see the site. And again, I think we've quite a good demonstration that is actually very well secluded. So I think actually this is a particularly useful site to choose. My particular question was, you say 22 megawatt. How many solar panels does that actually mean? Because I've tried to look through the application. I've not been able to, 18 megawatts, sorry. But I wasn't too sure exactly how many solar panels that physically entailed. Thank you.
Yeah, it's 18 megawatts, and the answer to that is I don't actually know. I would have to defer and hope that the agent who's going to speak will be able to pluck that figure from there.
I've sort of seen the figure of 2,000 and something per megawatt, but I'm not too sure. It depends on the scale of the actual solar panel. So I'd like to, if we could find out that question, the answer to that would be great.
So how many panels are needed to produce a megawatt? Well, that depends on...
I know the size, but on this particular application, I'd like to know if they could actually give us the total number of panels they're going to install. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any more questions? No, in which case I'm going to go to our first speaker then, please. Philippa Gatehouse. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If you'll give me a moment, I'll just get up the figures for you. And we're going to go with 72,000 for the most part. I'll come back to you with confirmation. There we go. So on behalf of JM Stratton, I'd like to thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee today. And I'd also really like to thank your case officer for working really proactively with us during the course of this application and for providing a really diligent and comprehensive report and for his early presentation. You'll note that the scheme's arrived at through an iterative process. So it's evolved in response to pre-application advice, EIA screening and scoping, and it's reflected the findings of technical assessments. We have arrived at a scheme that is worthy of your case officer's recommendation for approval. As already outlined, it's a renewable energy scheme for solar. It's supported by Core Policy 42. It has global, national, regional and local benefits. So it's contributing to England's energy security. It supports the government's goal of clean energy to combat high carbon emissions and combat global warming. It recognises Wiltshire's declaration of a climate emergency. More locally, it provides a direct cable to the farm complex. This is important because it provides the farm existing and future activities a cheap source of energy. It contributes to the farm's circular economy. Also, it accompanies and supports the diverse food production. It provides a stable income and it supports the rural economy. The proposal set before you has been designed to maximise site's efficiency, optimising the amount of energy generated. The proposal enhances biodiversity through the proposed seed mix, hedges, and the proposed tree belt, as we've just seen. And that also is used to screen the proposed solar panels in the wider landscape. Natural England supports the location of this proposal, which avoids harm to sensitive ecological receptors. We've done a lot of extensive research with our environmental impact team and have carefully analysed the proposal's impact on the special landscape. And the design has been informed accordingly with those mitigation measures as well. The proposal sits comfortably in the landscape. As we've just seen, it does not result in the industrialisation of the countryside, and it doesn't result in a village being entirely surrounded by solar farms. Indeed, as affirmed by your LVIA officer, the proposal would not be visible from nearby villages. And I would just like to reaffirm, no objections have been raised by any statutory consultees, nor have there been any neighbour or public objections. The proposal accords with both national and local policy. It contributes to achieving local, national and global renewable energy goals. And we do commend the case officer report and do request your support. In response to some of your questions raised, I think it's really important to note that the proposal has been informed by existing policy. So we have been putting in those mitigation measures. We have been aware of the special landscape. The proposal fits nicely with the existing solar nearby and the existing renewable energy schemes. I'm going to pass you over to the next speaker, who will be able to talk to you a little bit more about how it impacts the farm.
Okay, thank you, Philippa. So on that note, over to Josh Stratton then, please. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Just quickly to answer some of Councillor Newbury's points on local information. I've talked to quite a number of the local people. I've talked to the parish councils. I almost always stop walkers and rights-of-way users just to ask them where they've come from, what they're interested in. There's always a lot of interested questions about what we're up to. And we've actually installed information boards on the rights-of-way at 2 points at Codford with QR codes to link to our website. So we're acutely conscious of what people think about what we're up to. And we have developed the renewable energy schemes in phases. So we haven't blanketed the farm in 150 acres in one go. We've gone in much smaller lumps and smaller areas, and we've had considerable support, and it hasn't just been tacit support. It has been sort of overt support from the village and the local communities. We've been farming here for about 110 years at Codford. I'm the third generation. We've always innovated. My father was an incredibly innovative dairy and arable farmer. And we always want to get the best from our land and to make it fit for future generations. Farming will always be the foremost use of our land, but we have moved into a number of different areas over the last 20 years, whether it's housing, whether it's business units, and then the renewable energy projects. Cumulatively, we've now got about 200 people working within our farm land area. Some of this is on the farm itself and the associated farming industries, but also, many of these are in the projects we've created, whether it's IT businesses, glasshouse, events businesses, and so on. And we now have a really thriving local community. The solar fields are natural development from our previous projects. I think many of you know we've got a biogas plant, a greenhouse, and a number of solar developments. Plus, we've got roof-scale solar on all our grain stores to power that operation. Increasingly, we're integrating these diverse operations on our farm together with links creating the circular economy. An example of this is the fertiliser production from our AD plant, which feeds almost all of our 4,000 acres of cropland with nutritious, low-carbon slurry fertiliser. With this latest solar proposal, we'll link to batteries and through to our main farmstead in order to power our grain dryers and other projects in order to reduce our carbon footprint, bring down costs, and any surplus is going to go into the local grid. Environmental improvement is a key driver in everything we do. Our full-time ecologist is integral to all our activities. He uses knowledge to integrate our ecological projects into our mainstream operations. Examples of this are biodiverse plantings in our existing solar fields, which improve bird and butterfly counts. We've got soil health initiatives across our arable farming, and the proposed solar field is designed right from the outset to improve significantly the environmental output of the whole area, using a careful choice and positioning of grass, flowers, hedges and trees. And the farm's our priority is always to do with food production. The renewables, even on our farm, is only 3% of our land area, including this current solar application. Every year we take a bit of land out for environmental schemes and renewable schemes, but by improving soil health and better agricultural techniques, we're seeing that our actual food production is staying up at really good levels, and that's being maintained. This proposed solar field and our projects, we're trying to future-proof our farm, which is otherwise reliant on volatile weather and arable markets. This project will provide a direct supply of cheap, affordable energy, contributing to the farm's circular economy and local and national goals for low-carbon energy. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Josh. Appreciate that.
Chair, do you want me to come in just to clarify the number of panels?
Yes, go on then. The question was asked, so if you could.
So we're proposing...
Josh, can you turn your mic off, please? Thank you.
So it's 17 banks of ground-mounted solar-facing panels, and that's going to be an installed capacity of about 18,000 kilowatts. Each bank typically comprises 7 rows of panels with some variation to allow for the irregular field shape. Yeah, so there we go. That's all in the environmental impact assessment as well. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that, Philippa.
Each panel's 250 watts. So the maths is it's 18 million watts divided by 250, which is 72,000.
Right, okay. Thank you. Christopher, I'm going to come back to you. You're the only other speaker. Thank you.
Are we now into the debate, Chairman?
We are.
Okay.
Well, you can speak first, and then if you want to put forward a proposal, please do. But you, as divisional member, you're welcome
I'll see whether I'm
put
work
in
my
your
way up
submission.
to that. Thank you to Josh Stratton and his agent for coming along and speaking to us. That's really clearly Josh Stratton has been doing his best to do a local consultation, and I would just mark up the point that I think, for future reference, it would be better if we had the site notices somewhat nearer the site than a couple of miles away, and if we could please guarantee to actually notify the nearest neighbours. But clearly, Mr. Stratton has been doing some of that work for us. This application, Chairman, is nowhere near the worst that we have been seeing in Wiltshire lately, and I guess that is mostly because the applicants have taken care not to be proposing land which is near to people's houses and has a direct impact on them. So I accept that this is not anything like the worst. What I'm more worried about, I think, is the implications of the way officers are interpreting our policies, because this, you will see that on the map of Wiltshire, this very large solar farm is visible as was it a sort of pinkish blob on the whole of Wiltshire? And there it is, it's sort of bigger than a village. And clearly the precedent of the way officers are approaching policy, even in what is at the moment a valued landscape, is very worrying. I'm not going to ask the committee to refuse this application. I don't think I'm going to vote for it myself on a point of principle, but I am, as you know, not the biggest supporter of the industrialisation of the countryside. And on that point, there is a statutory consultee who's objecting. It's the National Landscapes Officer who says the proposal would add significantly to the extent of industrial development, effectively a substantial power station in a special landscape area. But so I'm not going to move anything, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Do I have anybody who does? Pip, Councillor Woodhouse.
No, I was going to make the proposal that we accept the
Please do.
recommendation.
Right, okay. And that's seconded. by Councillor Foster. Adrian. Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Shepherd. James, thank you.
Thank you very much. It seems eminently sensible that nowadays farms need to diversify. They need to future-proof, as he said, their own farming income, but also I think this is a really useful development in the southern area of our county. At the moment, we have most of the solar panel developments on a strip along the M4 in the northern part of the county. The reason this can go ahead is because it's being used on site, because again, we don't have to rely on the connectivity, which is the real reason we have all these solar farms really collected in one area. And I'm very happy that farmers are actually investing quite considerable amounts of money in saving the environment and also addressing climate change. And I hope that it gets the recognition that it deserves, because it's very easy to talk about saving the planet, but it's also another thing to actually do something about it. So I commend this, and I think it's a very sensible and well-positioned development, and I would hope that others on this committee support it. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Adrian.
Yes, and as I'm sure many of the members here will remember, I've mentioned in the past I come from a farming background. I reiterate what James has just said, and when you see people protesting constantly, and farmers in France do it very effectively, about not being paid sufficient for what they produce, not doing this, and in this case, we've got a farmer who is actively working with the system that there is at the present moment and making the best of what they've got and doing everything they can to sustain for the future. And I believe that any industry has to diversify, and farming has to do it with it. And this could be a lighthouse for very many other areas and farmers. And it doesn't require bureaucracy to get in the way to ensure that we have a sustainable agricultural economy within Great Britain. And now that we're not in Europe, we need that agricultural economy more than ever before. I applaud what this farmer's doing, and I would like to be the supporting this motion for that reason.
Thank you much indeed. David, did you have anything to add to that? Oh, I'll come back to you, George. Yeah. You don't. George, Councillor Jeans, thank you.
I also welcome this, and this what I'm going to ask. Hopefully is a benefit, not the cause a problem. It says page 90, all deliveries of solar panels, it gives times the 7:30 to 1800. Doesn't say nothing about construction work. It just says regarding the deliveries. But I mean, is it necessary to tie them? Because say it's pouring with rain or whatever the problem is, and they are got hundreds of solar panels, and somebody's prepared to do it on a Saturday. This does rather tie their hands. So I mean, do the hours have to be tight to Monday to Friday? That's my question.
That's just for the deliveries to protect people on Mount Pitt Hill. So the way it was originally drafted was that all construction should be limited to those hours. But with negotiation with the applicants, it was just all the deliveries of any materials for the development shall be restricted. There's no actual restrictions on when they're actually building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I don't much like the fact that 15.4% of the land is 3A, but we can't do a lot about that because that's pretty well locked by the rest of it. So if nobody else has got anything to say, I am going to go to the vote then. So you know what the proposal is, basically what we have before us. It's been proposed and seconded. All in favour of that, please. And any abstentions? One abstention. So that motion has been carried. Very many thanks indeed. So you've got the detail there. Yeah. Just one abstention, otherwise it was carried by all. There are no urgent items either. That motion's been carried. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance. And we are through well before 2 o'clock, which is almost amazing. Thank you very much indeed. Safe journeys home. Thank you. Bye-bye.